So exciting.
Yes. Yeah. You know, this No Man's Sky is really great because it has all the basic features the way this reality works. And why does it have that? Because it's efficient. That's the way you can most efficiently produce a reality frame to players. And it's so efficient that there was 4 guys programmed this thing until they got near production, and then they needed a lot more people for the testing and other sort of production problems. But it was 4 guys and a couple of, laptops sort of thing. It's a very efficient way to produce it, and their world is what Dave was just looking at this. We were discussing it yesterday. It's quadrillions, quintillions, quintillion planets. Each planet is unique. Everything on that planet is unique. The universe is so large that it's probably large as this universe. So it's basically on the same scale, and the planets are large on an order of this planet. 18 quintillion of these things in this universe, such that if tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were to be placed on various planets, there's in their lifetimes, probably no more than I think I read, or what Dave told me, 95% of the planets would still never have been discovered yet. And the probability of running into somebody else in this universe is small. So it's really a model of something like our whole physical universe.
So it's fractal in the sense that as you interact with it changes?
Yeah, it's all probabilistic. So as you interact with it and you look at a piece of it, if I look at this piece, then I will be sent data describing that piece. And I turn my head and look at the other piece, I'll be sent data describing that piece. And when I get to that world then is defined by random number selection, which then populates it. And it's time-based, so that once it's been populated with certain random number seeds, then it'll progress according to the rule set in time with that. So all the critters, all the plants, where they're placed, all of that just gets generated on the fly. So then you leave that planet and the computer computes nothing. See, all that's just gone. You go back there, it has remembered those random number seeds, so the whole thing you look at a piece of it and it can regenerate, look at the difference in time since the last time it generated, progress all that through that amount of time, and then there it is as if it's always been there and had been progressing. So then you leave it and then the computer doesn't have to do anything. So if you have 100,000 people there, all the computer has to do is generate 100,000 data streams. That's not such a big deal. It can do that easily, but yet it keeps track of this universe that's about the size of ours. So that's the way it, so right now I have a hard time explaining how that universe works. But in another decade, after this becomes common and has hundreds of thousands, if not millions of players that are doing, because it's just the first one. There are going to be a lot of other knockoffs and a lot of other things that maybe can turn this into social media besides an exploration game. And the whole concept of the virtual reality in a probabilistic sense and in terms of data streams, I think a decade from now, that'll be the easiest thing in the world to explain to people. They'll all say, well, sure. Yeah, I'm involved in realities like that, all the time. And it won't be such a difficult, head scratching, I just don't get it. I can't get my head wrapped around this virtual reality. So I think in another decade, it'll be the easiest explanation in the world because people will have experienced it. So we're talking about No Man's Sky, in case you're interested.
About virtual realities, I had a very special dream last night. All the virtual realities that I've seen so far, they are based on a sort of duality. I mean, everything that you define in those realities are based on two things. I mean, for example, we have material and anti-material. We define everything with its the term that you use. What is that? Significant other in these sort of realities. But I experienced some other realities that, for example, to know A, you have to know B to know A. In the rule sets that are based on duality. But for example, I saw triality or universes that were based on 4 factors. To know A, you had to know B, C, and D. I can't explain it more than that. It was so weird. It was very difficult. For example, yesterday I explained about some other virtual realities that you are not limited by space, for example, or you are not limited by time, but they are all based on duality. Still, you were in that duality universe. But these universes, they were completely different. Triality, or 4 factors, 5 factors. It was like there are a lot of parallel universes beside this universe that are not. The rule set is. It's not even right to say it was tighter. It was like totally different.
Yes. Yeah. Now he's not talking about games. He's talking about his experience in other reality systems. So it is like that. Now part of that is the way you interpret it. You know, part of that is is what you bring to it. And you probably are a left brain analytical kind of person who can see it in terms of that sort of perspective and notice the duality or notice the dimensionality of the things that you have to know. So that is part that you bring to it and the way you describe it. Somebody else would probably describe those same realities very differently because they wouldn't see those patterns that you see in the connections between things. So part of that is your own. But yes, the virtual realities out there are many, and I don't know, like you say, it's hard to describe, how varied and how different and they are. But see, a virtual reality is a math-based thing. So it's a logic-based thing. And there's just a whole lot you can do with that. It's not limited. There's not only one way that you can put that together. You can put it together in probably billions of different ways. And all it has to do is be a way that works. And by works means it has to, if it's a way that is functional, has some use. There's some way that entities can use it as a entropy reduction trainer like this, or it serves some other function. That is one thing that I've found, that they all have a function. They exist because they have value. I think if they had no value, they wouldn't be there. Sometimes it's hard to tell what the value is because
They have different functions than our reality. Right?
They may have, well,
some will have the same and some.
Most of them have the same fundamental function as this reality. Mostly it's for the entropy reduction of consciousness, because it's a consciousness system. That's what it does. So I found that's kind of uniform all over. But you can imagine all the different ways that can take place, all the different ways that life forms could possibly evolve, and all the different ways that consciousness might be able to spread its interactions out. We only know this kind of narrow way that's common to us. But yeah, I understand it's kind of confusion a lot of times when you get to realities, and they're very hard to figure out. And sometimes if you go back and go back and go back and spend more time there, you start to see bigger patterns and see, how they're working and what their purpose is and how they function. Sometimes you get these sorts of things just to give you the idea that anything's possible, not to constrain what you see by what you know. That helps. Well, I guess we've started. It's 9:09, so we were just kind of having a conversation, waiting for people to come in, and I guess that just kind of wandered into we've started. officially 9 minutes and 27 seconds ago. So, yes.
Did you explain your definition of entropy since you use the term so much?
Yes. Entropy is a basic physics term, comes out of thermodynamics, and it means it's a measure, let's put it this way, it's a measure of disorder. That's kind of the fundamental definition. It's a measure of disorder. Now, things that are ordered have ability to do something. As long as everything is random, no order at all, then a random system that has no order really has no ability to do anything. It's just random. There's no structure. There's nothing that can happen there. See, there's no action that can take place. Randomness makes everything else not available. So order allows function. If I have order, if I've got two sticks, well, then I can put one on top of the other, I can hit one with the other, I can do something. If I don't have anything but randomness, I can't do anything. So there's also this connection with order and randomness, that if entropy is a measure of a system's ability to do work, that means its ability to do something. Okay, so you can see how they're connected, randomness and order. So in science, there's these two viewpoints of entropy. It's the measure of a system's ability to do something, which is a measure of the system's order, of its structure, of the fact that it's not just random. So those two things, those two ideas are really connected, but you can look at it in terms of either one. Now, if you're an information system, which consciousness is, then entropy has to do with order in the sense that if all the bits are random, there's no information. If the bits have some sort of structure, some kind of organization, then you begin to lower the entropy. Okay? So high entropy is all random, lower entropy is there's some structure. Well, structure is information. Any kind of structure is information. Like sometimes I point out that, if I have up, down, up, well, what's the next one? Down, right? That's the pattern. So just that structure, just that pattern contains information, because you can tell me what the next one's going to be. You can tell me what the next 10 are going to be. And that wasn't anything more than up, down, you see, but that's information because it's structure as opposed to randomness. In a random system, there's no up, down. There's nothing. Everything's random. No context to define anything. So in an information system, lower entropy means information. It means order has created information. Now, information could be just something like up, down, but information that is valuable, that is useful for something, that you can use for something, that's even better, because that has function, which means it has relationship. If you can use it, that means it's not just one singular thing. I can do one thing and I can call it up, but if I haven't made a pattern, it's not useful. But now if I can line it up with a bunch of things, up, down, or 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, now I have a pattern that's interplay of two things. So the more things you have that are interplaying, that's more relationship and interconnection. And if I do this to that, then something else happens over here, and that builds up a more complex structure. It's lower entropy. So the more meaning and significance that your structure and organization has, then that meaning and significance really is a artifact of complexity, because meaning and significance comes from relationship, which is a complexity of things, of interactions of things. So that's what entropy means in an information system. It means order, it means meaning, significance. So it's not just making a pattern, but it's making a pattern that has relationship to something else, that has some kind of meaning to it. So in an information system like ours, the key idea that when we talk about lowering entropy, and that's our job to lower entropy, then we can see that in this larger context, that if we lower our entropy, then we are creating information. If you're an information system, that's good. That's life. You exist. If you de-evolve, that means that structure breaks down. It is, the relationships come apart. The meaning means less. And that then means that you're more random. More of your bits are just random than they were before, and that means your information system is dissipating. It's dissolving, it's going away. Well, if that continues, that's the de-evolution of information system. You end up with just a randomness, and your information system doesn't exist anymore. So we just say the information system is dead, gone, disappeared, evaporated. So then you can see that your information system, if it's aware, if it's self-aware, as consciousness is, then it sees evolution as a choice between existence and non-existence, or life and death, if you will. So to evolve is what you do if you're an information system. That's how you evolve, and to return to randomness is how you de-evolve. Now, that doesn't get us quite to where we are when we talk about our becoming love and lowering our entropy. So the connection there is that as this information system evolved, it found, like, this is just part of the way the fractal pattern works, it found that there were more, it was about choices, right? The lower your entropy, the more choices you have, the more ways you can put things together. I can do this instead of that is choices. So you have a very limited set of things you can do, a limited set of novelty if you just have one monolithic thing by itself, because it can just interact with itself. And it's much more, there are many more possibilities if you had two things interacting with each other, particularly if these two things are independent, two independent things. Well, independent means they each can make choices on their own. That says two things with free will, because now you don't know exactly how they're going to interact, because what this does depends on that. What that does depends on this. It's an interaction. Well, then you have 10 things. And it's like every time you go up to the number of things, the number of combinations and permutations of all the possibilities of interaction just goes up, actually, as you know, let's see, what do we call that? Anyway, goes up dramatically. Okay. So if you have hundreds of thousands of things with free will interacting with each other, now there are so many possibilities you can't even predict what might happen. It's unpredictable anymore. And it just evolves on its own. Well, okay, consciousness got to the point that it was a monolithic system. It was aware. It had found some patterns. It had found some meaning. It was aware of that. It knew that it needed to continue to evolve, more patterns, more meaning, more significance, but it kind of was stalled out. And it stalled out because it was one monolithic thing. So it said, let's break a bunch of pieces. Let's take a little subsets of this consciousness, let them all have free will and interact with each other. Now the things we can create, what we can build with that, is just immensely greater. So that's us. We're the pieces. We are these chunks of consciousness with free will that are out interacting. These are the individuated units of consciousness. Now we've just created a social system, because there's a bunch of aware pieces of consciousness interacting with each other. That defines a social system. Now, what we're trying to do is lower entropy, more information, more usefulness. How do you optimize a social system? Well, a social system is created by its interactions. How do you optimize the interactions in a social system? Well, the way you optimize a social system is by the interactions being cooperative, rather than each one trying to, get rid of the other one or whatever. It's cooperation among the pieces optimizes a social system. You further optimize it if that cooperation is caring, if it's working together, if it's a team rather than a bunch of individuals all trying to get everything for themselves, you see? So that's how we end up then with entropy being connected with love. Love is about other. it's about caring. Okay? It's about cooperation. Cooperation's about other. You don't cooperate with people if it's all about you. If I'm trying to just get everything I can get for me, and I really don't give a damn what anybody else has or whether they live or die isn't important to me, it's all about me. Well, that doesn't build. If everybody feels that way, what can you build with that kind of a system? Well, that's the fear-based system. See, fear is all about you. Fear is a vector pointing at you. Love is a vector pointing out from you about others. Okay, if it's all about you, and if everybody in their social system, it's all about them, then there's a couple of things that become difficult to have, like trust. It's all about me. I can't really trust you. We can make a deal, but you know, if I can get ahead by welching on that deal or taking advantage of you, well, that's good for me. Not good for you, but who cares about you? You see? So what did we end up with in a fear-based society? Well, eventually, a few things happen. And you could do this in a simulation and you'll find that it always happens like this, is that a few of the players end up with the predominance of the stuff. Most of the players end up with very little of the stuff. Because as you get more successful, it makes it easier for you to be more successful. The bigger and more stuff and more success you have, the more power you have, the easier it is to get more power. So it tends to, it tends to group up into power blocks. Okay. Then another thing is that the power blocks then tend to act like the individuals used to act. So now the power blocks tend to want to interact with each other, want to take advantage of each other, want to have whatever they have. So you have then struggle between the power blocks. Also, you have not only no trust, but you have groups that in these power blocks will kind of, bunches of entities will group together as a block because together they have more power than they do as individuals. So then you'll have this cohesion of units, the development of power blocks, the resources going to the, what's valuable going to the few who run the power blocks. And if you're listening to all this, you're probably thinking, that's the way we live, isn't it? That sounds a lot like this place. Most of the resources in the hands of a few, power blocks that struggle with each other, very little trust. Yeah, well, this kind of sounds like what you get when you have a predominance of fear-based consciousness. Okay, now think about the other side. If you have love-based consciousness, caring, it's about others, not about you, it's about cooperation. Now, often people, when they hear that, they say, oh yeah, okay, this is the collective. And the collective becomes the tyrant because now you just are a little cog in this collective wheel, and if the collective needs somebody to do this, and you get over there and turn that crank because that's what we need and you're part of our collective and there's no freedom inside the collective. That's wrong. That's what a collective looks like to somebody who's fear-based. Because somebody that's fear-based says, well, if I'm part of this collective thing, what about me? It's about me, and if I'm part of a collective, then the collective is going to overrun my own needs. So if you're fear-based, that's the way you see a collective, as something that's going to limit your free choice. But if you're other-based and cooperative, if you care about others, then the collective you see as an opportunity. It's not that, well, what are they going to make me do that I don't want to do? It's, what can I give? How can I contribute to this? How can I be a part of this thing? You see it differently. And suddenly there's 1,000 ways you can be a part of it because it's a big thing. You can be a part of it in all sorts of ways. And you have more choices than you ever had because as this little fear-based thing, your choices are very limited. Your choices are to, how much can I get? How can I get it? And once I get it, how can I keep it? Somebody else from taking it away from me. Well, your choices now are in this small subset of all about me. Whereas when you're part of this love-based group, you don't have that attitude. Your attitude is, how can I help? How can I be a part? There's thousands of ways to be part of this. I could connect this way or that way. I could do all sorts of things. And you have a lot more personal freedom, a lot more ability to express yourself, a lot more ability to do what you want, to express your own individuality in this collective system that is not fear-based than you ever did in a fear-based system where it was all about you. Because not only do you care and want to help whatever, everybody else cares and wants to help you. So if you say, well, gee, I really don't like this thing I'm doing now, that's really not me, then everybody else cares that you're there and doing something that's really not you. So everybody looks around and says, well, where can we find some place where you will be doing what is you? And if it's a big collective, there's places like that. There's always places where people can be who they are. And so you see, it's not the collective will run your life. That's the collective from a fear-based viewpoint. If you get into a society that is love-based, your choices, your free will, the things you can do, the things you can be, how you can express yourself grow. They don't shrink. It's the collective from the fear-based viewpoint where the collective forces you to its will. So most people here on this planet who live in the fear-based world see collective as a bad idea because that's going to limit them taking care of themselves. You know, it's going to be hard for them to do what they want to do in a collective. That's just the wrong idea. So that's kind of what it has to do with love. And so here we are in this conscious system. It wants to evolve. Love path is the optimal interaction that optimizes not for the whole only, but for everybody. Every individual gets optimized in a situation where love and caring is the way we act. So that's an optimal individuals and optimal for the whole. And the fear-based way, which is kind of our life, is not optimal for anybody. It's not optimal even for the people sitting on top of those various fear-based blocks, because there's always somebody trying to knock them off and take that position. There's always struggle going on. It's always a matter of control, and you have to control everything, because when it's about you, then it's about you controlling your environment to the point that you get what you want. So you're always in a point of uncertainty. You're always in a point of, there's always enemies in your life. There's always people that want to take whatever you have. So it's a constant struggle all the time. So that's kind of the two differences. So now you have the social system, and what are we here for? Well, the social system of consciousness will dissipate and die if we don't lower our entropy. And what makes this social system work for everybody is love and cooperation. So we are units of consciousness, pieces of a whole consciousness system, and our job is to grow up and become love, to learn how to give rather than just how to take, to learn to care about others rather than just try to optimize ourselves, to learn to be a part of something rather than try to control something. Let go of the control. Be an active contributor, not a controller, you see? So that's why that lowering our entropy means becoming love. That's kind of how all that's connected. So that's just the nature of our system. And all of these virtual realities that are in our system tend to have that same ethic, if you will, that same purpose. And the systems that I have been to and experienced are all set up, and sometimes it takes you a long while. Like I say, you got to visit and revisit and spend time there and whatever, get personally involved with it, and then you begin to see the pattern of how it particularly works. But when I've done that, the pattern always works in the same way, is that the entities involved are there to make choices, and by those choices, grow up. They can evolve or de-evolve based on those choices. There's just a lot of ways you can construct that game. It's not just constructed like this. So mostly that is the pattern that we have. That's the pattern we have here. Now I've been places that have been a lot kinder and gentler than this. So you might say the average entropy was a lot lower than it is here. I've been places where it is a whole lot worse than this, where the entropy was a lot higher than it is here. So this is a good place, I think. This is a very effective learning lab that we're in here. This is not the, the pits of fear. This is a pretty good place, and we have a lot of potential. There's a lot of growing room, and we have grown a lot. Just go back 300 years, and you will find that times were much more uncertain, much more violent, and much more arbitrary than they are now. So we've come quite a bit, and 300 years is just 300 years is just an eye blink, in our history of being here. We've been around for several million years, and out of those millions of years, just the last 300 years is, if all those years were like a day, this would be the last half second or so of that day. So the growth accelerates. The more you grow up, the easier it is to grow up more, right? So it tends to accelerate. So you may have a million years of not much change. We're kind of all interacting the same way for a long time, but then change starts to build, and the more it builds, the faster it builds. And that's partly why a lot of people now kind of feel a quickening, a sense of seeing a bigger picture. The dysfunction is becoming more and more obvious rather than take it for granted that that's just the way it is and will always be that way. People start to see, we could do better than this. We really could do better than this. Something's broken here. This fear-based culture we have is just not too optimal. And a sense of doing better is kind of general now in the population. Now, not many people agree on how it is you go about doing better, but just that we even see that as a possibility that we can do better is something that probably wasn't seen even 300 years ago, much less, a million years ago. So it is getting faster, it is evolving. These are very interesting times. We are growing up, and we're growing up faster and faster as we begin to see bigger and bigger pictures. So it's interesting times we're in. And yes, it looks bad. We look out, we read the news, we see the thing on TV, and everybody's trying to rip off everybody else, and everybody's trying to manipulate you and get you to buy this and buy that and vote for this person and have these attitudes and, be fearful of this because then they can control you, and all of that's going on. And there's a lot of greedy people and a lot of people who don't really care much about who they hurt and what they do as long as they get control and get their stuff. Yes, that's where we are, but we're also aware of something better. We've seen some light. We know where we need to go. Otherwise, you folks wouldn't be here. You're only here because you've seen something better. You know that that's not the way. You're looking for a bigger picture of something that works rather than this thing we have that doesn't. And for everyone you hear, there's another million someplace on this planet that feel the same way. So that's new. That's relatively new. Life used to be a lot more hopeless than it is now. You just were what you were and you did the best you could with it, and there wasn't any idea that it was ever going to get better than this. Well, now there's an idea that it will, and it has been. So we're doing all right. It's just a slow process, but it's getting faster.
When you visit another PR, you do that in the same way.
I do it two ways. There's two ways to visit another place. Pardon?
Can you repeat that? I didn't hear it.
Oh, I should be repeating these questions. I'm sorry, I've been lax at that. The question was, and we do have a mic back there that can pick up some of these questions, but they're just not as good as the mic that's picking up my voice because they're right up here by me and they're not really next to you guys. The question was asked whether or not I was in my energy form when I visited other reality frames. Was it a kind of an energetic exchange, getting information back and forth? And my reply to that was that there's two ways to visit another reality frame. One way you visit a frame is like you just described. Basically, you're a voyeur. You're looking, you see what's going on, you can kind of see interactions between individuals. You can even hear the interactions between individuals. You can kind of focus in on these two entities in this reality frame, and you can get the conversation between them. And there is no problem with languages. They're speaking some other kind of language. It doesn't matter what they're speaking. You pick up the thoughts. Telepathy doesn't come in language. It comes in concepts. It comes in ideas. So you don't get the words. You just get the content. Okay. You get the sense of it. You get the feeling of it, and that's the way telepathy works. So language isn't a problem. So anyway, that's one way. So you can hear and see. You don't really touch, smell, or feel so much, except you maybe feel emotionally, but that's different. Now, the other way is that you can actually go there and interact with them as one of them. You can manifest a body, if you will, and interact there. That comes with a lot of responsibility. And to do that, you have to have permission. The system needs to insert you into that, data stream. Again, their reality, just like No Man's Sky, it's all generated just to data streams, to individual data streams. So generating a body, which sounds like a really complex, difficult thing to do, means you're just getting data into their data stream that describes you.
Is that why sometimes like my dreams and some dreams, I go in and just observing, just like a voyeur of other
Right.
dreams, and actually talking to
Yes.
people and interacting with them.
Yes, you can
So somehow I manifested a body that I
Yeah,
didn't know.
right, you're interactive there. In other words, you're in their data stream. When they look at you, they see you, with a body of some sort, and the same sort of body they have, because otherwise you'd stand out as being, an alien in their viewpoint. So you just get insinuated into their data stream. Now, that's not something that you force. That's something that's a privilege, and the system has to do that. It has to put you into the data stream so that you can interact. There are some rules that go with that, some requirements. You can't create a problem there. You can't, you can't manifest this body there, on stage, in front of lots of people, because now that's aliens doing something weird, and it creates a problem. Unless that's something that happens there all the time, then it'd be okay. But you have to kind of abide by the culture and the people and the custom and whatever else that's there, so that you don't cause trouble. Okay, that's why all the aliens we see are always behind a bush, someplace you can't notice, where there's only a couple of people around. It's like Superman always has to change in a phone booth. He can't go out, and climb up on a stage in front of hundreds of people and rip off his Clark Kent, suit and be Superman. He has to do that so he doesn't, disturb the environment that he's in. You can't leave things. You can't take things back. You can't interact in ways that create problems, so that after you're gone, you've just made a mess of something. So if you do those kinds of things, then your ability to do that goes away, because you're privileged. I say your hall pass is revoked. You don't travel that way anymore, because you're not playing the game the way the game needs to be played. But if you do interact in ways that work for you, and if there is a reason that this interaction is going to work towards your growth, then it's something you can do. That's another point. If people who are trying to meet the guides, they're trying to interact, they're trying to go places, and they're having difficulty, one of the key elements in that is you have to have the right intent. It's not just, I want to do this because it'd be really cool. You have to have some sense of, why is this on your path to growing up and becoming love? You see? If it's on your path to growing up and becoming love, and that's a fact, not just not a hustle, but it really is, the system will help you. it will implement. It'll say, sure. And it will give, it will be basically trying to implement that. If it's, wow, that would be fun. I'd love to drop in his body in some other thing, and that'd be just the coolest experience ever. I could tell all my friends, and that's just cool. Then the system isn't interested in helping you do that. So you can try and try and try all you like, but without help, you're not going to do that because you can't insinuate yourself in that data stream. You see?
How does that happen exactly? What I'm not understanding is you said that there's a system that you cognizant when you are moving into these other worlds. How do I know that it's not my overactive imagination while I'm meditating? How do you differentiate between what you're concocting in your head to actually experiencing consciousness?
The question was, how do you know when you meet individuals or see things that you're not just making it up, that it isn't, it isn't your imagination, that you're just dealing basically with your own self or even your own higher self or whatever, but it's just something that you're working on your own? Well, there's two answers to that. And the first one will be not the best one, but it'll be the mundane one, and that is in time. You don't know initially. You could just be making it up. So you go someplace and you meet somebody, maybe that's your imagination. You as consciousness can create data. It's what you do. You can create data and share it. You as consciousness make up data. We call that your imagination. Data can come to you from another consciousness or from the system, and that's data. These data don't come with little flags that say this data, was made up and this data wasn't. You just get data, and then you have to interact with all that data. So there is no way to tell directly where that data comes from. So initially, when you go out of body and somebody comes up and says, hi George, nice to see you here. I'm your old ancestor from 3 generations back, welcome. And you're wondering, am I making this up? Well, that's because you might be, or you might not be. In time, if you just make it that one night stand, that one connection that you don't keep going back and whatever, then you'll never know. But if you do keep interacting with George, your old ancestor, it'll become clear after a while whether you're making up or not, because he'll have information, he'll have things to say, he'll have insights that you just don't have. And they'll hit you as, wow, I never would have thought of that. And eventually, with experience, you'll know whether this is something coming from outside of you or inside of you. It just takes a lot of experience. So you have to go to these reality frames, you have to interact with these people enough that you get a sense of what they are. Now, that's the not so good answer. The better answer is, it really doesn't matter. It's not important where the data comes from. It's data. You get it, and the question is it useful? What can you do with that data? How does that data help me evolve? How does it help me understand? How does it help me grow? What do I get out of it? So the reason why that's the better answer is, let's say that it is somebody that's outside of you, and it is your great uncle or something, and he has something important to tell you. And what if when he tells you, it just doesn't make any sense to you at all, it isn't helpful, it's just a bunch of stuff, and it's nothing you can deal with. Okay, well, what's the value of that? Nothing. What's the value of that connection? So far, nothing. Now let's say it does come from inside your own head, and wow, that's something you never really considered before. That's another viewpoint, and that helps you out. So are you going to say, I'd rather have the babble from my great-great-great-grandfather, or would I rather have this information that's useful? Well, that was just me, so we'll throw that away. I'll take the babble from great Uncle Harry. No, of course. So it doesn't matter where it comes from. You get data. The data could come from any number of sources. It could come from another entity, could come from the larger conscious system, could come from you, could come from any other piece of consciousness that exists. Trying to worry about the source is not the right question. Who is this and why are you talking to me is the wrong question. What can I do with this information? That's a better question. Is there any value in this? And often you have to interact with that entity or with that reality system multiple times until it becomes something that you're connected to at kind of a personal level, not just something you're looking at it the first time. And then you can have a better sense of it. So that's really the best answer to there. It really doesn't matter where it's coming from. Now, our problem is that we come from this virtual reality where there's lots of information and we have to sort out the good stuff from the bad stuff. So we immediately, on hearing something, we want to vet the source. We want to know, what does that source know about that? You know, telling me about physics. Do they have a degree in physics? You know, do they have a doctor's degree or just a bachelor's degree? And where have they worked and what have they done and how many papers have they published? And, you know, so we try to get some sense of the credibility of the source so that we can decide whether to believe them or not believe them. Well, that's the wrong approach. Believing them or not believing them will not take you anyplace important. It's just a belief. If it's not your experience, it's not your truth. If it's somebody else's truth, you're stuck with believing or not believing, but it isn't going to help you grow at all. But that's what we do here. We're fear-based, and we are fearful that we'll get misinformation that will lead us to take a misstep or lead us down some silly path. So we want to decide whether or not we should believe it or not believe it, because our own information is limited. Okay, what are you going to do with that? Our information's limited. There's a lot of things we don't have personal experience with. The way you deal with that is with open-minded skepticism. 1. 2, being at ease and accepting of uncertainty. I call that living gracefully with uncertainty. All right, you get this information and you want to know, well, is that true? Should I believe it? Wrong thing. You should say, well, maybe. I'll give that based on my own experience, I give that a 40%. I'll just keep my mind open and eyes open for more information. And you just live with that uncertainty. It's okay. That's 40%. Maybe you'll get more information on that next year and it'll go from 40% to 60%. And then you'll get more as you talk to other people, and maybe then it'll go to 80%. And then maybe you'll get some personal interaction and it'll go to 100% or 99%. Or maybe it'll go the other way. It'll get less and less likely. But instead of having to know, should I believe it or not, just hold it as a possibility with some probability, because all possibilities aren't the same. Some are more likely than others. Kind of sort that out and just leave it there as an unknown. You see, live gracefully with uncertainty. Live your life from what you do know. Make the choices based on your experience. And what you don't know, be aware that you don't know it. Accept that, do the best you can with what you do know. That way you are living an authentic life. You're not trying to have somebody else's experience. You're not trying to gain value basically by taking other people's experience. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't learn from other people's knowledge. You can, but only as far as you can process it from your own database. If it goes beyond what you can process, just live with uncertainty there. Because then it's not authentic, it's not yours. It can't help you grow. You can't be somebody else. You can't be smarter than you are. You just are. Accept that and go from there. So that's the way you deal with these sorts of things. So the real answer, the best answer is it doesn't matter where it comes from. It's just whether or not it's useful. Now, the second important thing here is that if it is useful to your growth, in general, the system will help you do it. We call that synchronicity a lot of times. Things that we need just fall in front of us. Connections we need to make just happen out of the strangest situations, okay? That's because those are things we need to grow. The fact that the system puts that together for us, well, that's good. It's trying to help us out. So there's a lot of help that we can get. And I know most people feel like I'm overlooked. I need a lot of help and nobody's helping me. You get all the help that you can use. Mostly that's because you're not ready yet to process that help. Nobody can make you grow up. Nobody can help you to grow up in that sense. You have to do that on your own. You have to grow up. The system isn't going to put some fairy dust on you and now you're grown up. You know, it doesn't work like that. You have to do it from the inside out. You have to make the choices with your free will. The system can only give you opportunities to make choices. And that's why we're here in this virtual reality, because we have so much richer opportunities to make choices than we would if we weren't in this virtual reality. So that's, I've kind of gone far afield, but in this little Satsang, right, whatever that is that we're doing here, because we have 2 whole days, you know, usually I do these things called fireside chats, and we talk for basically 3 hours and we stop. But here I have time to go into more detail, get a little deeper into what it means than I normally do. So that's why my answers are so long, is that I'm trying to take it all to a deeper level than typically gets talked about, because typically there just isn't that much time to talk that long on a single subject. So hopefully that's okay with you guys. You don't mind the increased depth, you know, because we do have time to spend on it.
I've got like a huge list of questions.
Of course, of course.
Pick one, I guess this.
A random choice. Reach up into that distribution and pull out a random question.
What my intuition says. So.
This one's kind of got 2 parts, I guess. It's about extra energy attachments that some people experience or perceive that they have against me. Anyway, so I guess one would be some of my karmic energy carryover that attached entities against either earth.
Can you speak louder?
Either, okay.
Or come?
So I asked a question about extra energy attachments that people have. Either when we reincarnate, we carry back some of this karmic, I guess, karmic energy that comes back, carryover, dross, or whatever you want to call it, that from previous incarnations. I could give an example. Let's say, for example, you're killed in a plane crash in a previous life, and when you die, you say, I'm never going to fly in another plane again. People come back and they have a phobia of flying. Now that can be addressed when they go into a past life regression and they perceive that they were killed in a past life, and then that phobia sort of disappears. Now how that works, I have no idea, but it doesn't work. The other question would be, part of that is there's also attached entities like these darker energy or earthbound spirit, I guess, that's hasn't descended but gets attached to someone's consciousness or body. And is there any ideas about that? Or what would be a purpose, or is there any evolutionary purpose for that?
Yes, I can talk to that. Do you know anybody who gets any attachments by positive things? Or is this mostly...
It's mostly negative. Most I've heard is the media where it's really bad. But that's intent.
Okay, mostly we tend to see that in terms of negatives, things that can connect or attach to us, as you say, that then cause problems of some sort, something you have to deal with. We don't see the positives, because the positives, you know, we really might not call it an attachment, but that's like all the help that I'm explaining that you get when you can use it. There's lots of, you know, you might think of your guides as a helpful attachment, and guides are basically just an interface. It's your personal interface to the larger consciousness system. That's the guide. There isn't this guide that hangs around with you all the time, watching you in case you ask a question. You just have an interface with the larger consciousness system, And when you ask a question, the system answers it, but the system needs an interface with you because you're here and you want to vet the source because that's just the way you work. So then it creates a form that you can interact with that has personality and whatever, and it's your interface, and it can be a consistent interface. So that's kind of things that guides us. So it happens on all sides. It happens positive connections, whatever. So you're talking about connections that people can have with quote unquote energy. Energy is a metaphor, and that isn't physical. Well, that can be positive, that can be negative, it can be helpful, it can be a drag. The ones that are negative, that concern you, can be multiple things. Mostly, they are manifestations of fears in the individual themselves. Mostly, that's what they are. Doesn't have to always be that, but typically people have fears. When they have fears, that fear gets often a name and a body. You know, they get an embodiment of that fear. And that embodiment of that fear can be almost anything. So your own fear can turn into a thing that you have to deal with. And that's what a lot of it is. Now, there are, in the margins, there are cases where some non-physical entity, for some reason, picks you out for special interest. You know, they become interested in you for some reason. There may be a connection to some other, something that happened some other time, but again, typically, it's not so much that this is an entity. Anything that we interact with that interacts with us, in our minds, we turn that into an entity. We turn it into a being, because that's our definition of something that's interactive, right? We don't interact with rocks. You know, we don't have conversations, or rocks don't do things to us. We do things to rocks because we're a being. Rocks don't do anything to us because they're inanimate. So anything that'll interact with us is another being. Well, that's not necessarily the case. That's,
think of it as just a negative energy.
yeah. So it's not necessarily a being that's out, that has free will and is conscious and aware and for some reason is giving you a hard time. That's making a being out of it. Sometimes it's just an energy exchange. Energy. Now again, energy is a metaphor. There is no energy. There is no light. It's a virtual reality. These are metaphors for things. So sometimes, mostly, it's just an interaction between you, your past, your own fear, or guilt, or inadequacy, or any of those negative things, because we're talking about a negative interaction. So it's any of those negative things that you have. And it doesn't take much to trigger that fear. And once the fear is triggered, it can build up into something that is almost has a life of its own, if you will. Now, for an example, a very extreme example, we'll talk about something that I guess most of us would know by the name of, say, voodoo or something like that. Okay. Now, the way that works is that a person uses their intent to modify future probability and make you ill rather than make you well. It's the same thing as healing, except it's in the opposite direction. It's negative based rather than trying to be helpful. Well, okay. That interaction, that negative interaction, can only take place if you have some fear attached to it. It can only take place in a really meaningful or in a strong way if you have some fear attached to it. That's why somebody has to send you a doll with the pin in it, or somebody has to write you a letter with bloodstains on it, or somebody has to do something that's scary, because as soon as you get some fear around that situation, that fear now, like I said before, it's a handle. You can be manipulated. You can be, energy can be given to you. That person now has a channel to affect you through that fear. If you don't have any fear at all about it, now the fear's not necessarily always in your intellect. The fear can be at your being level. But if you have no fear at all about it, that energy that they try to give to you that's malevolent and not nice doesn't stick. You don't accept it. It's not yours.
Is that part of the rule set of interaction?
It's part of the rule set of interaction, yes. That's just the way it is. So you have this problem, and this person, this witch doctor or voodoo person is giving you this problem, partly because of your connection with the problem with the fear. You are part of that problem. You're engaged with that problem through your fear. So it's a similar thing. That's kind of an extreme example, but it's a similar thing. When you have fears, when you have guilts, when you have all those other things, and as all that stuff builds up, often we'll take that and create something out of it that we then interact with. And that kind of follows us around and bedevils us. And because we're interacting with it, it's a being. Because it seems to do things to us, it's a sentient being. It's got free will, it's got intelligence, and it's nasty, and it's giving us a hard time. So that's what I mean by most of the time, it's that sort of thing. It's a personalization of your own negativity that you've turned into something you have to interact with. It's turned into your own personal boogeyman, and it becomes a being because that's what we call things we interact with. And now it's intelligent and it's non-physical because there's no physical thing there. If it's non-physical, then it must come from the other non-physical world. So now it's a non-physical being from the non-physical worlds, and it's attacking you. And now you can build up a story about why that is. You can connect it to a past life and karmic relations, and that's a story you can build up to make it make sense to you in your own mind, because things that happen to us, we always create stories to create a causal link, because we just don't accept things that just happen without a causal link. So we make causes up for them. So that's what it is most of the time, not all the time. Sometimes it is some voodoo person. Sometimes it is some connection that you have from maybe a past life or whatever that is still, not literally but figuratively, haunting you, that still is having this sort of connection. Sometimes it's just random. Sort of like sometimes you go out and walk in the park and somebody jumps out behind a bush and takes all your money, or hits you with a stick and then takes all your money. You get mugged. Sometimes it just happens. So this is a very large reality. There's nice beings, there's not so nice beings. We have free will, means you can evolve or de-evolve based on your choices. So there's some de-evolved beings that are pretty much on the fear side of things. And occasionally, you might have some interaction that may then draw that attention. So sometimes it's just like you say, just like you think. It is actually a connection with some other entity that now can focus on you and again send you things. But if you have no fear or connection there, it's very hard for them to do much to you. Very difficult. So your gaming language, your saving throw, your shield is your fearlessness. To not accept it, to just go on and let it go, and not engage with it. If your fear engages with it, then you're engaging with it.
Otherwise, it's just like it's just a part of your data stream.
Yes,
Nothing to get rid of.
exactly. It's just a part of your data stream you need to clean up and get rid of for the most part. But there are those times when there are interactions from truly the non-physical that do, but those are very, very, very small number compared to the number of what I described first, which is you dealing with your, with your.
He's the real deal, but the thing that amazed me about him, he's feared. So when he goes
Yes.
I said, don't you get scared of it? He goes,
No. Right. That's why. Yeah, that's why you can do that. You see, it never touches him. So that's the key. But yes, there are those cases, and in those cases, there's a couple of things you can do. One, you can learn to be aware enough and have enough of your own, I hate to say power, but we'll use that word, enough of your own power that you can just deal with it. You can just handle it. Most of the time, the negative entities on a big picture scale, they tend to be weak. They don't tend to be real powerful. They're a lot more scary than they are actually powerful. The fear thing then works in their favor. So, you know, they can appear to be 10 feet tall, you know, big fangs and all muscle, but that's just an appearance. They can appear to be any way they want. So typically they're weak. Typically, because there's not a lot of power, there's not a lot of strength on the negative side. It disintegrates itself. You know, the negative side's kind of an unstable thing. It's like negativity can grow up to be like this powerful, and the positive side can grow up to like this positive, you know, this powerful. So negative is it's a weak choice. And you can, mostly with just a little effort, under your own power, you can deal with those negative things without too much trouble, if you're not fearful. If you're fearful, then you'll fall for the 8 foot tall, you know, all muscle and fangs image, and then you won't be able to deal with it. Okay, so that's kind of the second thing. Now, the other way you can deal with it is to find somebody who has a greater understanding and less fear than you do that can be helpful to you. That's another way that you can deal with those things. But most people they have this idea that they're very vulnerable. And it's frightening to think about going out of body, and there's all sorts of entities and other people and so on. Well, you know, if you grew up in Kansas on a farm, you probably think it's frightening to go outside of your hotel in New York City. You know, it probably really worries you. If you live in New York City, that's a silly fear. Yeah, there's murders every day in New York City, but look, there's millions of people live there. You know, it's not a high probability if you go walk out of your apartment, if you have an apartment in a nice neighborhood or whatever. But it's that kind of thing. Most of the fear is because of ignorance, because you don't really understand, you don't know how to deal with it, and you're afraid. And I really don't I don't talk about this very often, because I don't like to create fear, because that's the wrong thing to create. That's the opposite side of love. So that's going backwards. And if you talk about the evil things that go bump under the bed at night, you know, that might get you, then you just frighten a whole lot of people who now will have negative experiences because the possibility of it has been created in their mind, whereas before they would never have that experience because the possibility wasn't there, you see. So it's not a subject I talk about a lot, but it is a real subject that needs to be addressed, because some people do have problems with that, and they need to either find some help or they need to just grow up themselves, get rid of their fear, and they can deal with it without a lot of trouble.
What's interesting about the overall system is it actually will guide people that have this problem to the people that are
Yes, that happens a lot, yes.
It happens,
That happens a lot. Yes, I've got 3 or 4 people who are like outreach people for me, and they are constantly feeding me people who need help. And they just need somebody that can help them out, because they don't have the knowledge, understanding, or whatever to do that. So yes, the system will do that. It'll put you in the right spot. So there are problems like that, but there's problems like that here. You see, it isn't any more frightening than walking down the street. Yes, things can happen here. We get in our cars, we could be in an automobile accident. We walk in a park, we could be mugged. You know, things could happen. You fly in an airplane, it might fall out of the sky. You know, things happen. Existence is risky. But for the most part, the risks aren't that big a deal. This is a virtual reality. If your elf gets run over by the barbarian, you just constitute your elf and he gets back in the game. Well, this is the same with us. So if you have the bigger picture attitude that it's just not such a scary thing, deal with it.
Sometimes those fear-based messages actually are healing. They're trying to tell us something. Sometimes I'm going to very loosely interacting, and the data comes from fear-based. Sometimes it comes from that fear-base, and I have to deal with something. And once I deal with it, I know what my energy is coming up, and I have order. This order that is then in my brain that's lucid, and then I can deal with things. But there's also like come back to reoccurring incidences in my brains that are very lucid, where there's a fear base, but it's not actually based within fear within inside myself. I want to go there because it's telling me something that's helpful for me here then. So sometimes it gives you healing messages, and sometimes it's something that you need to deal with.
Well, knowing that you have fear or being able to deal with things that are fearful, that's just part of dealing with life. Yeah. So life is risky. Existence is risky. But also the risk is all very temporary. Your elf gets run over, then he just responds. We do too. We get run over. We go out of here and we get run over by a cement truck or something. Well, we just respond and get back in the game and do something else. And if you think, wow, yeah, but I was really making progress here, this is really going to mess me up. This is one out of thousands, this is not, nothing is that
Also, for
big a deal.
that might have voices in their head or whatever, and then they turn it into everything clear. For a lot of them, it's a learning experience, right?
Yes.
It's an awakening that they're
Again.
awakening.
Again, fear is the problem, you see. If somebody hears a voice in their head and the voice tells them things and they're not afraid, that doesn't create fear in them, then they'll probably say, hey voice, what's up? Where'd you come from? Got any interesting news? And maybe they can then deal with that voice. Maybe they even realize that it's, Uncle Joe, passed away last week. There may be some meaning to it for them, something they can learn from it. And if the only thing they have to learn is, I just have to learn to ignore that voice, it's annoying, well, that's another thing to learn, what to focus on and what you can shut out. And you can do that too. You don't have to communicate with anything you don't want to. You have the switch. You can turn it off. Any communication that comes to you, if you don't want to receive it, you've got the off button. You can just say reject, like in your email, you put in a little rule, send that email from that person to the trash automatically. And you can do that with your consciousness, but that's something you need to learn. Now, if those voices persist anyway because it's some kind of biochemical problem going on that you have that is creating that thing, then that's another thing to learn how to live with it. So the things that happen to us that are not nice, you might say, or not helpful, are challenges to learn from them if we have the right attitude. But if we start feeling sorry for ourselves, we start getting fearful, we're being controlled by aliens, or we're being controlled by whatever, the non-physical forces that tell us to go do evil things. And if we get into that, we connect to that with our fear, then that's the problem. Now we are being controlled, but we're mostly being controlled by our own fear, not the thing from the outside. It's our own fear is really the thing that has created our problem. Yeah, well, the karmic carryover, the karma thing is a real idea, but in a much more general sense. It's not that, all right, I ran over somebody, when I was drunk and a kid, and now, somebody's going to run over me because it's a karma thing. It's not like that. Karma basically is a result of the fact that there are no free passes. You don't graduate from second grade to third grade just because you're old enough to do that. In other words, you have to learn it. It's a learn and growing thing. If you don't learn it, you'll get another chance to learn it. And if you don't learn it then, you'll get another chance to learn it. And that's how the karma thing works, is there are no free passes. You have to grow. So if there's some sort of lesson and you just fail it, you're not getting it, you'll get it in another form. You won't necessarily get it in the same form. That's not helpful. You'll get it in whatever form is most likely to help you succeed. So if what you did is run over somebody, it doesn't mean somebody has to run over you. It's that you need to be more careful. You need to be more caring and more responsible. And you'll get lessons to help you grow that caring and responsibility in some other way that has nothing to do with automobile accidents, but you have to learn that lesson. And if you don't learn it, you'll get it in another form. And you'll keep getting it until you get it. It'll come, you know, and you'll have to deal with that time after time after time. And there is no way for you to skip that. Can I skip that? You know, could you just, you know, give me a B and let me pass? You know, you can't do that. So it's growing up. So that's karma. Is if you don't get it, you get to do it again, which is one of the things that really should give people incentive to grow up. Because if you don't grow up, if you think this isn't fun, you know, well, it's not going to be fun next time either. Because, yeah, right, you want to stay in kindergarten all your life. Well, that's the way it is. So it's like, well, maybe you need to get serious and grow up, because otherwise it's just more of the same. So the fact that this is a tough life shouldn't make you feel like giving up, throwing in the towel, blaming somebody else. It really ought to make you take stock of what your fears are and start working on them. Otherwise you'll revisit them.
Great answer.
Yeah.
So you talked about from the being level, and then it seems like you're pointing to your chest and then like where.
Yeah, well, there is no being level in your body. The body and your.
Is it related to feelings? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. When you talk about the being level, I go like this because that's kind of the center, right? Other people say, "Oh, it's the heart." You know, heart is your. It's not a heart. You know, it's not your stomach. It's not your solar plexus. The body is just a virtual body, and it has really no connection to the consciousness in a non-physical. You know, we tend to do that because it's a metaphor. Well, my being level is here in my being, you know, right here in my middle, because where else would it be? It's just a metaphor, nothing actual with that. So what is the being level? The being level is who and what you are at your core. Now I'm talking about you, consciousness, not you, you know, you're not the body. When I say you, I mean you as consciousness, an individuated unit of consciousness playing whatever body you're playing right now. Okay. So you as a consciousness have a fundamental core of the way you are. Given a situation, you're going to interact, react in a way that you are. That's your core. Now, besides that core, you also have an ego and an intellect and beliefs, and those things can change your behavior. That's called acting. It's not the way you are, and it's not really authentic to you, but it's the way you act. So you've maybe met some people in your life who acted very kind and very smiley and very nice, and then when you're not looking, wham, you know, they hit you in the back of the head. Well, that's an act. They act like nice, friendly, kind people, but they're really not. Now, what they really are is what they are at the being level. What they pretend to be is different, is an act. And that's often at the intellectual level. So that's what I'm talking about at the being level. And I just do this because it's a metaphor, because it's not from up here. It's not out of the head. See, this is an intellect, right? The head, the brain doesn't have anything to do with the intellect. It's all consciousness. But we've got these metaphors that everybody understands, and somehow consciousness is up here and the decision and intellect is in the head, because we think our virtual brain has something to do with it. It's just our consciousness that has something to do with it. But we can't point to something non-physical, so we point to our head because that's easier to say. So it's not intellectual, it's at the being level. But no, there's not a connection between physiology in the virtual body and things in consciousness.
Sorry, one other thing about taking care with the kind of people that you interact with? Do you find that you need to set boundaries with lots of people so like you're not surrounded by fear-based people?
Yeah, well, you can do that to some extent. There's two parts of that, and the question was interacting with people. Do you have to take care not to interact with people that are very fear-based? Depends on how extremely fear-based they are. If you didn't interact with people who were fear-based, you'd have to go dig a hole and get in it and stay there. Okay? People are fear-based. That's just the way we are here. And you can tell that just by looking at the news, because what you see out there is a reflection of us at the being level, who we are. Okay? The nastiness and unpleasantness you see in the world is a reflection of our average level of entropy, our quality as human beings. So yes, fear-based people are all over the place. Some are more fear-based than others. So from that extent, you have to deal with real people. Now, when you deal with real people, that doesn't mean that you have to, spend a whole lot of time with them. You deal with a lot of people, say at work, that you don't socialize with outside of work. They're just people you interact with at work. Some of them you may like, some of them you may really dislike. But it doesn't matter, because you're a professional and you will do the job and you will interact with them and you will be friendly and you will be courteous and you will depend on them to do their part and you'll do your part, and you don't let that get in the way. You just interact with you have to. Well, that's the way you interact with people that you really don't want to be around. You're nice, you're friendly, you interact the way you have to, you're courteous, but you just don't spend any more time with them than you need to. And some of those may be your relatives, you feel that way about them. You just don't spend any more time on them than you need to. Now there's others who you really don't like, but you have to spend time with them because they're your closer relatives. They're your brothers and sisters, or your mother and father, or the next door neighbors who there's no way you can avoid them, or whatever. You have to deal with them. Maybe at work it's your boss. You see? You have to deal with them. So then you deal with them at as probably as shallow a level as you can that actually gets the job done. Nice, courteous, pleasant, but you just deal with them. It's just business. Now there are those people that are maybe really close to you, maybe your significant other, and maybe there's things you don't like about that too. Well, the only person you can change is yourself. Mostly, we blame everybody else, including our significant other, for our own issues, because nobody who has a negative feeling says, oh, I created that. That's my responsibility. Whenever you have a negative feeling, you always say, he created that, she created that, and my reaction's just normal. I mean, it's just, my reaction's totally justified because that just wasn't nice. So that's the way we see life. But you have to realize that's our interpretation. That's our fear and our ego's interpretation mostly, because we are just like everybody else walking around with fear and ego, and we have to deal with that. So if it's somebody that you really need to have a relationship with, maybe your children or your spouse or something, then you have to look at your part in that. It's not just them. They're just handy to blame things on. You have to look at your part. You have to see it from their eyes. You have to be in their head. You have to communicate. You have to work on it, as they say. Relationships require work. So in that case, it's not just stay away from people you don't like. Sometimes it's like, why do I don't like them? If they're casual, like you work with them, that's a good rule. But if you're not, if it's people you need to interact with, then you need to grow up. Maybe they need to grow up too, but you can't help that. You just have to grow up. And if you don't have any ego, then the way they act won't bother you. You won't have the negative reaction, you see. So yes, maybe that person is just rude. They just be the way they are. They're just rude. But if you grow up, that rudeness won't affect you. It's like not having fear, and it doesn't affect you. If you don't have the ego and the fear yourself, then that rudeness is just theirs. And if anything, you feel compassion for them because you know they must not be a very happy person. Because when you express negativity and rudeness, you're not a very happy person. And maybe you could even think, what could I do to make them feel better? And they've just been rude to you. You know, they just said something nasty. And you might feel, gee, they must feel really bad. Wonder if I could do something to cheer them up. But you don't feel, you don't take the rudeness on as personal because you don't have an ego. It's your ego that says, oh, they shouldn't have said that to me. I didn't deserve that. That was wrong. They're not nice. You see, that's your ego talking because it's all about you. What did they do to me? That wasn't fair to me. That upsets me. You see, that's the ego. Instead of, gee, they must not be feeling very good. They must be living in misery all the time. And you go over and give them a kiss or shake their hand or whatever is appropriate depending on who they are, and see if you can't make them feel better. Give them the safety and the security to maybe change themselves to where they say, oh, that was pretty harsh. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. You see? Now they give them an opportunity, but what you do is you get angry back at them, tell them how rude they were, then instead of them saying, maybe I was a little harsh, they turn around and blame that on you. You just don't understand, you see, and now you've got this thing where two egos are throwing negativity at each other. Very dysfunctional. So in the most part, negativity in other people shouldn't bother you if you don't have the ego that negativity can attach to. So the number one thing you can do is grow up to where that negativity is seen as it really is, which is it's about them, not about you. We tend to personalize everything because we have ego. It's about us. But instead, if it's about them, then the rude comment is just goes right by. You don't attach to it. It's not rude because only an ego can find it to be rude. If you don't have the ego, you're concerned about them and how they feel, see? So it's not really a problem, and you are the one that's in control of your own ego and your own fears. So you always solve most of your problems dealing with other people by fixing yourself, not by blaming them for them being the way they are. If you see everybody as just doing the best they can with what they've got, and with what they've got, that means they've come in at a certain level of quality. It's just where they are in the evolutionary process. It's what they've learned since they've been here. So if they tend to be angry or negative, well, that's where they are. They've got that much fear that's making them unhappy. And everybody comes in with the quality of their individuated unit of consciousness. And from there, we're supposed to grow up and become love. So they're just doing the best they can with whatever they came in with. And they're struggling with it. And in as much as they have ego and fear, they're not real happy. Because you don't get happy, you don't find peace and joy until you get rid of that fear. See? So if you look at everybody like that, then you have compassion. You don't see somebody that's said something that's not nice to you because that's your ego. You see somebody who's just not happy and you have compassion for them. So it's not a problem dealing with other people with their fear if you don't have the ego. Now, the other thing that you can do, that people do, that is not helpful at all, is that they see themselves as better and superior to most everybody else. And that's a problem. They say, I'm really evolved. I'm all peace and love. I just can't stand living with these people that are so, so unevolved. You see? Well, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? When you put it like that, it's really pretty obvious. But there's people who feel that way, that they have to just kind of rise above it and ignore the unwashed masses of people with egos, not like them. And you get that a lot, where other people have disdain for those that they feel are less evolved. I'm enlightened, you're not. I'll put up with you, but I want you to know that I'm enlightened and you're not. It's this sort of thing. Well, those sorts of people aren't nearly as enlightened as they imagine themselves to be. It's their fear and their ego that wants them to rise above all the nastiness they see and just not be a part of it, not connect with it, get away from it.
Speaking of you just mentioned enlightenment. Is this what this whole Eastern philosophy of religion is moving towards? Is it analogous to MBT?
Sure.
Are they doing the same thing?
Well, yes, at a very fundamental level, what they're doing and what most all religions are doing. If you take away the dogma, what most all religions are doing is trying to evolve toward becoming love. Turn the other cheek, be nice to people, have compassion. That's kind of the core values that spirituality has, and it's kind of the core values that most religions have. But then on top of that, they have all this dogma that creates, ego, and I'm better than you are, and I'm right and you're wrong, and religious wars, and you got all this other junk that goes with it. But at the core of it, the core values, they're all the same. So when they talk about enlightenment, you see, they're talking about growing up. That's their word for growing up, evolving. Now, if they get to the point that they feel like they're enlightened, I've arrived, I'm enlightened, I don't have anything else to learn, now you're talking about their ego. You see, there really is no such thing as reaching enlightenment. There is no end point. We don't get to an end point where, okay, we're done. My entropy just went to zero. It's low as it can get. I'm perfect now. Now I can go. What do you do when you're done? I think you sit on a cloud and play a harp or something like that. You do what the people who are done do, which is mostly nothing, I think. That's imagination, you see. That's not the way it works. There isn't an end point. This is evolution. Evolution doesn't work to a goal. Evolution didn't say, well, okay, this evolution on this planet was to make humans. We've made them, we're done. That isn't it. Evolution just keeps on chugging on. It just changes. As long as there are states to explore, it explores them. And as much as those states have some value, it keeps them. As much as they don't, they get discarded. That's how evolution works. You're never done. Now, what is it that you get when you grow up? You become love. When you become love, who's it about? Other. So what about somebody that says, wow, okay, as soon as I get, I'm almost ready to get out of here. I can't wait to just leave this place, evolve beyond it. I don't want to come back here anymore. So I'm working on this evolution so that I can get out of this hellhole. Well, what's that sound like? Sounds like fear and ego to me. Sounds like somebody who doesn't want to actually help others. They want to help themselves. They want to get out of this awful place. You see, if they were really love, they wouldn't say, I want to get out of here. I'm going to evolve so I can leave this place. They'd say, I see a lot of people here that need help. See, that's somebody who's enlightened. I see a lot of people who need help. I'll find ways to help these people in my next incarnation and the next incarnation. See, that's somebody that's become love. So this idea that you've got this endpoint, you're going to become enlightened and then you get to leave and go some nice place where they play harps, on clouds, and it'll just a bunch of enlightened people standing around talking to each other, telling each other how enlightened they are, impressing each other with their magnificence. That is not the way it's going to work. What happens in this evolution game is when you stop trying to evolve, you start de-evolving. Okay? Entropy happens. If you're not working at reducing it, it starts to increase. Second law of thermodynamics, it applies everywhere. If you're not working at evolving, you will begin to de-evolve. So you get to the point where you say, I'm done. That's the point where you start de-evolving to being less done than even you were when you claimed that you were done. You have to constantly work at it. So no, there is no done place. That upsets a lot of people when they go, I could do this forever, Well, your consciousness, you're going to grow up, it's going to change. Now there are other reality frames. You can be done with this one and go to some other one, but in that other reality frame, the basic ethic is the same. You're there to grow up, to become love, and that's what you're all about. So that's what we are. We're pieces of consciousness. Our job is to evolve, and that job is a secure job. It's not going to end. You're not going to be fired. You know, you're always going to have that job, and you're never going to be done with it, because as soon as you're done, a job will come right back, because your entropy is going to start to go up as long as you sit around and say, well, I'm above it all. I don't have to do anything. I don't need to help anybody. I've helped people I've helped people for 10,000 lifetimes. I'm not going to help anybody else. Well, you obviously have a problem there. You've got ego, you've got fear. The fear is that you don't want to go back where all that work was. You know, the ego is that you're done and now somehow you're above everyone else, and that doesn't work. So in India, where we have everybody's working toward enlightenment, think of that idea as they're working on growing up, on becoming more enlightened. But when enlightenment becomes an end stage, I'm going to get to this point where I'm enlightened, and then somehow I'm different than everybody here. That doesn't happen. That's just a mistake. Now, some of them do believe that, and some of those people in India will tell you, I'm enlightened, and this is my last time here. Well, they just don't understand the bigger picture. That's not the way it works.
So with all these monks, people have actually been studied clinically, scientifically, in every way. MRIs have shown. I recognize again it's a virtual brain, it's a virtual reality.
Yeah.
However, our system of measurement has shown that they actually have attained very high states of
Sure.
what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Peace and love and happiness within.
Absolutely. It's all very real. And the mind leads, the body follows. So as their consciousness grows to that level, their body modifies itself to support that, because the body sets the constraints on what the consciousness can do. So as the consciousness grows up, the body actually modifies itself too to reflect that growth.
That's a good thing though. Like I think that's an achievement to be able to reach that within our lifetime.
Yes, but yes, and it's a good goal, but that's the goal of growing up. It's not that I'm getting to a stopping point. It's not an end point. It's not, the goal is to grow. The goal isn't to get to this point where you can quit. And that's
Hold on just for a moment. We've got to do a break. And I think this conversation could go right through the night. So,
great.
So one quick announcement for lunch. There is a brunch going on in the restaurant. You can order off the menu. However, they're offering us the brunch at the senior's price. If you say you're in this workshop, which is $22. It's not a bad price for brunch. So. I promised Greg one question before the break, so if it's all right, can we move to Greg to get this question, then we're going to do a 10-minute break, because yesterday we didn't get one in. So does that work?
Yes, and whoever is in charge here, and it's not me, I just talk. Whoever's in charge here, when it's time for a break, just stand up and say, this is the last question. After this question, we're going to do a break. Okay. Just stand up, make the announcement, and whatever, same for lunch. Don't depend on me. I don't know what's going on. I have no idea what time it is. I'm just up here kind of connecting into what's going on here, and I'm out of it, as they say, those kinds of details. So please, just stand up and interject yourself and tell us when it's time to do things.
All right. I think my voice is loud enough, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So we have to regress a little, because that conversation was amazing. And my question, I think it'll be helpful for people in the room. As a chiropractor, when I used to take on, I'd finish a shift and be heavy at the end of my shift, taking on other people's energies. Mm-hmm. And then I got advice, put up shields, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Totally fear-based. So then trying to get rid of those were even harder. So then I said, screw that. I'm going to do nothing but love. And then I found when I did have attachments or whatever, they were much easier to release when I got home or whatever you want to do. Now, the more love I become, the more less attached. But I'm wondering if you have any advice still to help me with that.
Yes.
And then the second part of the question is, like being who you are at that being level, and then also with my boundaries. So when I have a patient in front of me, I have one patient in particular in mind who's, man, she is just suffering, and so. But what I found is she's also, excuse the terminology, but she's at like a gaming hole that no matter how much I give her, she will keep wanting more. Like no matter how much I am being helpful and helping her, all kinds of stuff. And she's such a victim so far in her life that I can't. There's nothing much more that I can give her until she gets that she's being a victim.
Yes. Okay, the first thing is you getting kind of taking the heaviness, if you will, some of the bad stuff out of people, but retaining it yourself. Okay, that happens because you believe it does, because you believe it can. That's a belief. Many people, when they first start healing others, feel like they have to take whatever's wrong with that person. They have to take it on themselves. They can take it away, but they have to keep it. That's like some sort of belief in the conservation of misery. That somebody's got to be miserable, well, it's not them, but then it'll have to be me, but that's okay because I can dissipate it and I can do something with it. But that's just a belief. It doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to take on any of it. Zero. None of it has to be something that you get, but somewhere in your mind, somewhere you've got an attitude or a belief that transfer to you, from their negativity, or the way that you help them get rid of the negativity is to pull it out of them, into yourself, is just a belief. Their negativity is not a physical thing. Remember, this is a virtual body. That's a body that's a bunch of ones and zeros in a computer. Their consciousness. When you help them get rid of their negativity, you're not really pulling stuff out of their body. You're modifying their intent. You're helping them feel better. You're helping them let go of tension, let go of stress, let go of negativity in their life and just release it and let it go. But when they release it and let it go, it just disappears. They just don't have it anymore. It's not a thing that has to go someplace. It doesn't fall on the floor. It doesn't go into you. It's not a thing at all. But if we see it as a thing, when I see it, when I say see it, I don't mean your eyes, but if in your worldview it's a thing, then things have to be dealt with. So if it's out of them, then where is it? Because it's a thing, then it has its independent existence, and then it either lies on your floor or on the bed for the next patient to get in that energy, or you absorb it or something else. But that's just your belief system that it's a thing and you have to do something with it. Take it on or somehow dispose of it or whatever. Now when people heal, when I teach people how to heal, I tell them that they need to be neat and clean. They need to clean up after themselves. So if they're going to take out a black spot, well, I tell them, put it in a jar, put it on the lid, throw it in the sun. Why do I tell them that? Not because that black spot has any real substance, but because in their minds, if they have a belief that it has real substance, then somewhere in their mind they'll think, oh, I put my hands on that thing. Oh, what if that thing got into me? Oh, what if I'm going to get that now? And because they think that becomes a possibility, because now they may put some fear into it, which will raise the probability that they're going to have symptoms to express that, and sure enough, it happens. They'll get sick from somebody else's sickness. So I give them the instructions to be neat and clean and tidy up, and all the things they use and all the implements that touch black things, do something with them, throw them in the sun, not because those things actually have any power to do anything to anybody, but because the people doing it have beliefs that they'll end up hurting themselves if they don't dispose of it, because once they dispose of it, now that thing's gone. they don't have to worry about it anymore. So I tell them, if you're going to use your hands, put on gloves first. Of course, this is in your mind, right? You're healing. So put on your gloves, then go grab the grass. And then when you're done, take your gloves off, put them in a jar, throw them in the sun. And it's for the protection of those people from themselves that I tell them that. Otherwise, you'll end up with a whole bunch of people in their healing who will end up getting ill from it because they have the idea that they're taking on illness, or they may have taken on, or it's a possibility that they have. And you eliminate that possibility by giving them tools to eliminate it. It's all intent. And then we have all these tools that are mind games to help us focus the intent. And somewhere your intention allows for the possibility of taking that stuff on yourself. Okay, got it. I'm done.
Unless there's, if you have another point.
No, I'm done. That's it.
Go to 10-minute break, folks, and then let's go again. And if you can, now we have a mic. If you want to ask a question, just if you would, put your hand up, I'll get you the mic. Okay, good.
Okay, we'll answer the second question that we had, and that was when you meet or when you're dealing with somebody who just seems to be beyond help. You just can't reach them. Their sense of victimhood is so ingrained and deep that trying to get them to see the world any other way seems to be impossible. And as much as you pour something into that to make it better, it just gets converted back into the same thing again. And how to deal with that was really the question. What can you do with that? The answer is that the only way that you can help somebody else change, you can't change anybody else. They have to change themselves. The only way you can help other people change is to give them a safe space in which to do it. If you can give them an environment where they can kind of reach out to make those changes, then that's as much as you can do. And once you've made that environment to the best of your ability, that's it. If they have free will, they'd have free will. So if they don't reach out to stretch, to find the courage to change themselves, then they're just stuck there. And they may not get out. Or maybe later they will get an environment, or maybe after sometimes you have to hit the very bottom before you have the energy and the desire to come out of it. That's that dark night of the soul sort of thing, where you descend and descend and descend, and you finally get to a point where it's so bad that you face it and start moving up the other direction. But that's a choice that people have to make. So if you're trying everything that you know to give them that environment where they can change, you've tried talking, you've tried working with your mind, you've tried with your hands, and you've done all these things, and they still choose to be a victim, they still choose to be full of misery and fear, nothing you can do about that. And you have to let them be and basically give them the respect that they are who they are, and they are making the choices they're making, and kind of let them be, but not let them be with a sense of you're hopeless. Not with any negative sense, but with the sense that they're struggling in the best way they know how, and they're just not yet ready to do anything differently. And until they get ready, there isn't anything else there's nothing else that you can do. Now, if you can think of something else, another approach, something put it in a context that they might get, well, try those things. But eventually you run out of things to try, then you just have to love them as they are, accept them as they are, have compassion for them as they are, wish them well, smile at them as much as you can, be at least be a joyful part of their life. When they see you, you're not sad or unhappy, you're up and you give them a smile. So you don't look down on them, you just let them go. It's often like that with the people we really care about. I have any number of people tell me about they have parents, let's say, and the parents are always fighting with each other. They're always at each other and complaining and fussing and blaming each other, and they see that. They used to be in that situation. They were part of that dynamic. They realized that that wasn't healthy. They got out of it. They've grown past it. And now, looking back at it, it's perfectly clear to them how their parents are hurting each other and preventing each other from, well, not really preventing each other from growing, but creating an environment in which it's hard to grow. It's easy to grow your ego in that kind of a situation. And they ask, well, what can I do about it? And it's the same question. There's nothing you can do about it. Just give them as much love and caring as you can to make their existence as positive as possible so that they can make the change themselves, but don't take it personally. It's just where they are. And they deserve your respect as genuine, authentic beings who are just at that level of ego and fear, and they have to work it out. It's kind of not your thing to do. They have to do it. So sometimes people feel committed, like I have to do something. There's something wrong there and I need to fix it some way. And they feel bad, even maybe guilty, that they're not somehow fixing it because they see the dysfunction. They see what would fix it, but they can't implement it. And now they're basically upset and have a negativity because they're not successful in being able to fix it. You just have to let it go. It just is the way it is. And have to accept that. So you can't change, you can't make people change. You can only give them an environment in which they choose to change themselves. So that's the sad part of love. Love has this sad component too. And the sad component is that people you care about, which gets to be a bigger and bigger number of people as you grow up, are just actively hurting themselves. They're just going through life shooting themselves in the foot every so often and complaining and blaming it on somebody else. And you say, wow, I can see all the misery that they're causing for themselves, all the pain that they're causing for themselves. I wish I could do something to help, but you know you can't. And to not let that then bring you down, to not let that be, my empathy is such that now I'm in a funk because these people are all in a funk and I can't help them and I should help them. Well, now that's you, your ego. Somehow you feel like you ought to be able to heal, you ought to be able to help, and you can't, and therefore you've failed. Well, that's just your ego. You need to just let it go. It just is the way it is. They are the way they are, and it's, you can do what you can do about it, and then you just have to let it go with a smile on your face and not let it be a part of your own personal, ego attachment to that situation.
So I can be committed to an empowering conversation, putting the ball in her court, doing the best I can to give her my interpretation of what would be in her best interest, and then just
let it go. And it'll help. You will be most effective if you can put your head in her mental space. If you can see life from her perspective. That's kind of the optimum. If you see it from your perspective, it's totally different than her perspective. So when you look at it, it's perfectly clear what needs to be done. The attitude that is hurting, the attitudes that would help. And explaining that to her, she may not be able to process that because that's not her vision of the way things are. That's not the way she sees it. And you're telling her something that's in a language and in a way that just can't be computed. So you need to give people information that they can process from their viewpoint. You also have to give people information that's just one small step different than where they are. If you give people too much and you find somebody that, they're at A, they really need to get to B because A is not a good place. And if you tell them all about B and what it is and how it'll be when they get there, and it's too much. They can't deal with that. They can't process that. That's not in their reality. What you have to do is tell them where it's A plus one little step where that will be and how that will feel. That's something they can imagine. That's something they can actually take a step toward, because it's just a little bit different than where they are, but it's a step in the right direction. You see, now you giving them information they can process. So that's another thing. Whenever you communicate with people, you have to, one, don't tell them things that they can't process, because that just pushes them the other way. They don't know. They're overwhelmed. They can't process it. They can't deal with that. Can't use it. It may be very valuable information, but they just can't use it. So look at it from their viewpoint. Get inside their head. Feel what they're feeling. See the world from their viewpoint, and see if you can't give them something that's just a small step in the right direction ahead of that. And then next, let them, if they are willing to do that, let them internalize that, let them make that a part of who they are, and then help them with the next step. And then help them with the next step. And then eventually they'll look back and say, hey, I see a trend here. And they'll begin to see bigger pictures, and now suddenly they can see B and all the potential there, and that it's available to them. So that's another point. You have to, you know, 'cause people often accuse me of not telling the whole story, although as long as I take to answer your question, you think I would tell the whole story. And it's true. I don't tell people anything more than I think they can process. So otherwise, it's just not helpful. And more often than not, it's hurtful. So you have to really be helpful to somebody, you have to be able to see reality through their eyes and know where they are and what they're feeling and why they're feeling that way. So you do this little, Vulcan mind meld thing, and where you get to share their feelings and their understanding of reality, and then let that be your guide of what you can do next. Because a lot of times people try to help people. Like you talk to the arguing parents, and you go in and say, listen, Mom and Dad, cut that out. This is not helpful. Stop bickering. Look for the good parts. Don't just keep blaming each other and looking at the bad parts. And they both look at you like, it's none of your business. And they've missed the whole point. They don't get what you're saying. They don't understand it. They don't process it. That's not in their reality. You see, you've gone too far away to explain to them what the problem is. You need to get closer to where they are and take a little step. So maybe that'll help if it makes you better at communicating. We tend to communicate with people from where we are. We assume that they have our worldview, and then we give them a solution based on our worldview of what it is they need to do, and it's not necessarily useful to them. That may be impossible. You may try all that and it may not work, but then you're back to do the best you can, and it's their problem to solve. Okay.
You mentioned the mind meld thing.
Mm-hmm. That was just a metaphor. Yeah, the Vulcan mind meld thing. Everybody's seen Spock do the Vulcan mind meld. They get the idea. You get to share the thoughts of somebody else.
So do you have a process by which you do that?
Yes. It's just intention. You just get in their data stream and you get in their feelings. So basically you share their thinking, their thoughts. And that's something you just do with intention. We're all connected. We're all communicated with each other. And you can share somebody else's thoughts. Now you might think, well, that's pretty invasive, getting in somebody else's head and thinking, getting what they're thinking and what they're feeling and that sort of thing. You don't do it because you want to eavesdrop. You don't do it because you're curious about what they're thinking about something. That's not the point. You say you do that because you need to help them. And you can't help them if you don't understand what their problem is. You can see their problem from your own perspective, but you need to see it from their perspective. So if that's your intent, then that works fine. And you don't say, while I was in there, I noticed this. Did you really do that? It's not that sort of thing at all. You're not eavesdropping. You're not going through their life and looking at all the pictures. What you're doing is trying to understand enough, just enough, of what they are feeling, seeing, and thinking so that you can help solve their problem. Anything else that isn't pertinent to that, you don't see, you don't hear, you're not part of. It's kind of a very precise surgical intervention, if you will, that just gets the information that you need. And the reason it works that way is because that's your intent. Your intent is to just capture the information you need to help you solve the problem of, how do I help these people? See, I do that while I'm sitting here talking to you. When you ask me a question, and the question isn't really obvious, I have to go into your mind to see what really is that question. What's the problem? So that I can give you an answer that actually scratches your itch, that solves your problem, rather than me trying to guess what you really meant and then saying something that's off the subject. So sometimes if I don't always do that, only when it seems like it's appropriate. So it's not that I do that all the time, but it's just a handy thing. If you want to, you can taste the food that somebody else is eating. If you just want to plug into that taste and say, well, what does that hamburger taste like? Is that a dill pickle? And you can taste it. You just collect that information. The information's there. So it's just a matter of using your intent. If you abuse it and use it badly, you probably will again have your hall pass, revoked, and you won't be able to do that. And your ability to do it will diminish with time, because what you're doing will create its own entropy, which will start to de-evolve your capacity to do it. So it's kind of built, the system is built in with its own checks and balances. Yeah, so that's the way that works. Yes, other people's minds and what they're thinking and feeling are open to you if you have a good reason and a good intent for doing it. If you're just curious, or if you want to know for your own advantage. Oh, I want to know what you're thinking or feeling, because if I know that, I can take advantage of you, you see. That sort of thing, no. Or just curiosity, no. But otherwise, it's available. It's like this, as you grow up, you find out that reality is really an interesting place. And there's all sorts of things that are available to you. And they're all there as tools for you to use to be helpful. So you learn the tools and how to use them. But if you're not grown up, then those tools aren't available. And you don't know how to access them, and you don't know how to use them. So see, it's kind of self-policing. Now, you can use control rather than love to get information. So sometimes it can be misused, but again, the negative side tends to be weak and ineffectual. It's not all that good at doing anything other than being negative. It's good at being self-focused and using other people, but when it comes to these sorts of things, they're usually pretty clumsy at it. So you don't really have to worry about that either. So it's not really that things are going to be prying into your private business. If they have the ability to do that, they also are at a point where it's for your benefit, not for their benefit. And it's very precise, and they don't get anything more than they absolutely need to answer that question, because that's the intent. What do I need to know to help that person? Everything else stays private. But life is like that, and that'll scare some people. They'll feel vulnerable, like, they're open books and people can look in and see their darkest moments, but it's not like that. Don't be frightened of any of those things. It doesn't work like that.
Have you ever used any sort of exercises to get out of the left side of your brain? Like, other than meditation, I've heard of things like painting with your non-dominant hand, or all kinds of stuff.
There are things you can do like that, but the direct question was, have I ever done anything like that? And no. And although I may be a little unusual, I came into this world a lot more right brain than I was left brain. I came in with a very holistic view. The world was always larger than this physical world, pretty much. But I knew that to do the things that I needed to do here, and to let's leave it at that, to do the things I needed to do here, that I needed to develop that left brain, that I needed to approach it, say, from science, from logic, not from poetry or any other sorts of things, not from description, but from science. And in order to do that, I had to develop that left brain. So I had an inclination to go into technical things, just even as a small child, because I came here with that as part of what it was I was supposed to do. So I like taking things apart and seeing how they worked and putting them back together like engineers do. And I took physics as a major because it was the hardest thing that I'd ever done. It was just really, really difficult for me to get my left brain to be in that linear process, because basically I'd reach out and grasp a whole concept, pull it in, not the little logical steps it takes to get there. But if you don't have all the little logical steps that it takes to get there, you can't explain that concept to anybody else. It's just yours, not, you know, it's really hard to share. That's the way right brain knowledge is. It's holistic, but it's personal, and you can't explain it very well to anybody, at least not in a way that they get it, that they understand it. So that wasn't going to be helpful to me here. So I found physics to be very difficult, very hard to wrap my head around the process. So I worked at it and worked at it and worked at it. Math was very difficult for me too. But eventually, I just worked at it to the point that I got it, and then it got easier and easier. And then the interesting thing happened, that the physics and the math started to take on this right brain holistic thing. So then I could do both. I could intuit answers as well as derive them. And that's really handy, because it's easier to derive something if you know where you're going, you know, if you know where it's supposed to go. You can, if it starts going off the wrong direction, you can say, must have overlooked something there, it was a mistake. So it makes everything easier. So I started off right-brained and had to grow the left brain. But as I was a graduate student in physics, I was probably a very typical graduate student in physics, because the right brain stuff had been 20 years left behind, or maybe not that long, 18 years left behind. And I was pretty solidly left brain, like most physicists are. If it's not logical process, it's nonsense. It's the things you can measure and all the things that really don't matter. You know, that kind of a left brain idea.
Did you have trouble getting that connection?
No, I never actually lost it. All the time I was developing the left brain, that right brain was still in there. I was still having bigger pictures, but they were mostly not integrated with the left. There was a left and a right, and I'd kind of let the two worlds be separate, not joined. It was sometime later that they got to be joined into just one worldview. But it was there. I kind of discounted it, didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it, but it was always there, attracting my attention sometimes. And I'd say, yeah, well, that's kind of interesting, but I don't really know what that means, and I'd leave it alone. But then eventually I got the two of them together, and I think that's the better way to do it. You know, just recently, just a few weeks ago, I was on the internet and I ran across this right brain, left brain test to see which you are, right or left brain. So I said, well, that'll be interesting. I'll take this test. So I did. I had, I don't know, 20, 30 questions. So you answered and went down, and mine came out to be exactly 50-50. Exactly. And I thought, well, that test is pretty accurate, you know. I didn't expect it to be that accurate. I thought it'd probably be a little lopsided one to the other, but it came out exactly 50-50.
Tom, can you explain how remote viewing works from a consciousness perspective? Are you tapping into the overall consciousness, or some people say you're going into the future and pulling it back to the now?
Yeah. No, you can remote view the future, like you can remote view the past, like you can remote view the present. Remote viewing works by the remote viewer, and they don't do this intentionally. They just learn the process and the mental state they have to be in order to get the information that they get. So it's all kind of an experiential thing that they do by practice. What they're actually doing is collecting data out of the database. If they're working on something in the present, like going to a location on the surface of the earth, they're pulling something out of the database that has just taken place. Now this database gets updated like every 10 to the minus 44 seconds, so if you get the stuff that's just newly in there, that's present. That's so close to present that nobody will notice that it isn't absolutely now. It's only a few billionths of a second past now. So, but they're getting this out of the database, and that's what they're reporting. So their intent is to gather the data. I want to know about what's these coordinates. That intent then goes to the database, pulls out the information. And for a long time, remote viewers felt that they were limited just to the present. They could go places on the earth and see what was there, and that was their remote viewing. And then they realized that they could go other places that weren't on the earth, like the moon or a planet or some other thing, and they could go see what was there. And then the next big step was they could go into the past and into the future and see what was there. And those became those were big aha moments for the remote viewers, that they realized they could do other things other than the earth, then other things other than, present. And they played with those enough to realize that they were pretty good at doing past and future as well. Well, that's just the database. You got this database, and the database is either really near the present, past or future, is really near the present, and that's for pretty much the present, or it's probable future, which they don't understand that future is only probable. They think it's the future. It's just a probable future. Or they can go to the past, and they're getting that out of the database as well. And just like you can explore those databases and ask questions, and you will get answers that are probable. If you wanted to and understood the system, you could say, well, I don't want the most probable answer. I want the third most probable answer. Then you'd get a different set of answers that were the third most probable answer, or the 10th most probable answer. So you get an interaction. The default is the most probable answer when you ask your question. So they go there and they interact with it like it was there, because they're interacting. The people there interact to what they say. Again, probability. They say something back, they get another probability. It's a probability-based thing, but the probability is good, because what are you? You are a collection of information. You have past, you have processing, you have a certain capability that you've developed, and that's it. So you are a probable being, if you will, with choices, but you also have something else that makes you different from them. You have free will. You get to make a free will choice. In the history database, there's no free will. It's history. It's done. Those are just you in the past are you without the free will. So if I take everything that's you, which is all the memory, all the angst, all the fear, all the everything, all the feelings, the emotions, every thought, every feeling, and I just take the free will out of that, and that's you in the history database. So that really is you. You got to ask you things. What is it you buried in the backyard? I saw you digging, the other night there in the past database, and you could answer me, or you could tell me it's none of my business. Depends on what's more or less probable and what I asked for. So that's what they're getting into. The remote viewers are just tapping into the database. And that's why they can do past, that's why they can do future. And now when you're remote viewing, you have several ways you can tap into the database. So let's say you're going to have an object, and you've got something in your pocket, and I'm going to try to remote view what it is. There's several ways I can access the database. I can go to the past database and say, let me see what he put in his pocket. I can go to something that doesn't define past or future and say, let me see what he put in his pocket on a monitor, on a screen, because we're real used to monitors now. That makes it a good metaphor. Or I could say, let me see in the future when I've already told him what I think's in his pocket, and he pulls it out of his pocket to show me. Okay, I can get that data too because there's a probable future, and that probable future is going to be pretty accurate because I am going to answer, and you will pull something out of that pocket. So the probability of you pulling something out of that pocket to show me what the item is very close to 100%. So you see, even though it's a probable future, it's very, very probable that's going to take place because here's the game we're playing. You've got something in your pocket, I'm going to guess it, then you're going to show me what it is. So very high probability. So I can go into the future to see what you're going to show me after I've already told you what I think it is, and then I can see it that way and tell you what it is. So you see, I have different ways that I can approach the problem and get data. I can get data out of the past, I can get data out of the future, I can get data without saying past or future, just on a monitor.
But it also works like, but I guess that's basically the Stanford University. You just say, it's just like in the protocol from Stanford University, you just say what's in that envelope, right? But because you're attaching where they put the number on the target, and you just focus on the number, and it still works.
Sure. Somebody knows. It's just like the healing. It's just like the healing. You don't have to know that you know, I want you to heal Susie Q, Madam X, whatever. And that works just as well because somebody knows exactly who that is. So you just have your intent, I want to heal on Madam X, whoever that person is that's part of this experiment, that's the diagnosing and healing I'm going to do. That's an address. It's a valid address that you can use. You don't need to be more specific than that. You don't need to know what their name is or anything else. See, I shouldn't say a long time ago, people would think, because they have beliefs, that you required something of the person to heal them. You know, you need a little piece of their hair. You know, get me a DNA sample, give me a little lock of their hair, give me a photograph of them, and then I can heal them, but without that, I've got no connection to them. That's a belief. Just like believing that the bad energy is going to have to come up to you in order to get rid of it from them. So if you believe that, then it works that way. You can't do anything because that's your belief unless you get that piece of hair or that picture. But you don't need any of that stuff. All you need is a unique address. And Mr. or Mrs. X, that's part of this experiment, that's enough address because somebody knows who that is. Somebody wrote that down. And you go right through that. Consciousness is all netted. You go right through that. So it's the same sort of thing. You can look at an envelope that nobody knows really what's in that envelope because the person that wrote down data doesn't know what envelope it got put in. And the person that shuffled envelopes has no idea what envelope you picked up. So there isn't anybody on the planet that has any idea what's in that envelope unless they all got together and, you know, traded information. And that's in your favor as a remote viewer because now you don't have any information to confuse you. So you just say there's something in that envelope, which is a fact, and there's coordinates in there, and whatever those coordinates are, that's what I want to go see. Perfectly valid, accurate, specific address. Because afterwards, after you've done and you've made your pictures and you've said what you're going to say, somebody's going to open the envelope and it's going to become a record of fact what those coordinates are and do they match with what you saw. So that's a valid address to say that whatever's in that envelope, that's where I want to go. And it's an advantage to do that because if you told me, oh, there's some place, you know, between, you know, New York and Boston that, you know, such and such, now I start second guessing you. I try to figure out from my memory. Yeah, I've been there. I've driven that before. What's there that's of major interest that I could see? And now you've ruined the whole thing because instead of just getting it, you have your ego trying to fill in the blanks. Much better for just not to know. So that's how that works. So remote viewing is just a simple thing, you know, out of the database. Yeah, I guess that's it. That's how that works.
Hi, Tom. Well, as you pointed out, we're from Edmonton, so we were talking earlier, and I just wanted to know if the consciousness is all-knowing and it's an intelligent being, I'm just saying the feeling because I don't have an actual word for it. Why do we need IUC? Like, why are we here trying to evolve and trying to do things if the information already exists? You know how you're saying, like, oh, it's, if you want something, it's there, you can pull it from there. So if it's all knowing, if it's all intelligent, what is the point of IUC, I guess?
Okay, what do they need us for? Right?
Yeah, like what's the point of it?
The point of it is that consciousness needed to evolve, okay? And at this point, let's just say it is a singular thing, just one unitary thing. Okay, now it has certain choices, certain novelty, certain size decision space, if you will. That decision space grows immensely if it takes pieces of itself and gives them free will, just like it has. It's consciousness, that's fine. So now it's got an IUOC. Yeah.
That's a point of consciousness.
Yes, a little point of consciousness there. It sure is. Anyway, so it has, you know, if it can create subsets of itself that interact, the novelty, the possibility of what can develop out of that is much greater than it is of just the thing by itself. That's why it developed IUOCs, okay? Because 1,000 things that are independent with free will, interacting and all making choices, can create all sorts of things, including havoc, you know, all sorts of things that otherwise just a single thing is not going to do, because it's interactive. So now instead of just one thing, there's lots of things interacting with each other. Interaction means is that if this piece does something, it affects that piece. And when this piece does something, it affects 10 other pieces. So now you have pieces affecting pieces who are affecting pieces, and you get this real complex web of possibility grows up with all of that, okay? And having all of these individuated units of consciousness growing up and becoming love is lowering a lot of entropy of the system. It's a process that can just keep on going. Now, let's say the consciousness system says, yeah, I've learned a lot of these lessons. It's just me. You know, it's me talking to myself, that's all, but I've learned to love myself, and I'm now perfect love, and I'm as low entry as I can get. Well, that's okay. So now what are you going to do? Well, there's nothing left to do. I've kind of done all the things that I can do, and I've got all the sets of choices, and I've made the better choices, and there's just not that much room yet to do something else because it's just me. So now what happens when you are no longer able to put effort into lowering entropy? Entropy starts to increase. You start to de-evolve. Wow, the system needed more flexibility, it needed more decision space, more headroom, a bigger thing that it could grow into. Well, all of these little subsets of consciousness, all these IUOC, now that's all them growing up, becoming love, that's a challenge. That's something I can work on. You know, I could make a virtual reality for them so that they could, you know, experience better. I could do this, I could do that, I could help. Suddenly, the larger conscious system has a whole lot of things to do, a whole lot of choices to make and ways of interacting with this big social system that it has now. So it took something that was relatively simple and limited and turned it into something that was virtually unlimited. And it's so complex that nobody could ever figure out what it was going to do next. So that's why it needs us. It's not a matter of the larger conscious system saying, well, I'm low entropy, why don't I just delete all those pesky IUOCs who are all out there waging war and doing stupid things anyway, you know, I just delete the whole bunch of them and here I am. I'm perfect now, I've grown up. Well, he's just eliminated 99.999% of the ways that things can grow and be put together and form something bigger. Because you have something much bigger if you have thousands of IUOCs cooperating and agreeing and building something than you do if you have just one thing. It's kind of doing what it can. So the IUOC creation was a technology, if you will. It was a strategy to maintain evolution. So again, the evolution isn't important because of where you're going. The evolution is important because of the process of getting there.
Okay, and I have another question. In terms of intent, so you know how you kind of touched on, you know, you're trying to help this person, you know, how you can base that upon your intent. So let's say there's two people and there's one thing they're trying to manifest, but they're both don't have the same intent. So which one manifests?
Okay, intent changes future probability. And say I want future probability to go this way and you want future probability to go that way. So you're intending real hard for it to go this way and I'm intending what happens. It depends on which one of us can influence it the most. If I'm a stronger influence of probability than you are, then it goes the way I want. If you're a stronger influencer of intent than I am, it goes the other way. Everybody's not the same as far as influencing intent. Remember, the two things that matter to whether how much you influence intent is one, how focused are you, which kind of boils down to can you get all the noise out of your system. You know, you don't have that, you're not spreading your consciousness in 100 different places at once. It's all focused on one narrow thing. That's being focused. Well, people have varying abilities to do that. Some people, their minds are just totally scattered all the time. Actually, that's most people. That's probably 99% of the population are like that. Now, if you do meditation, it teaches you to focus and let go of the noise, and now you have more focus. The second thing that's important is that it comes out of a being level, not out of your intellect. So it needs to come from the being level. And I guess there's a third thing that's important, and that is the quality of your intent, because the system tends to help those who have a good quality of intent. It tends to go that way. The system's biased toward becoming love. It's biased against becoming fear. So to become fear, you have to work at it. So you have to work at it becoming love too. But it's easy to become fear in a small way. It's hard to become fear in a big way, because fear destroys itself. Fear interferes with its own coherency about fear. It's high entropy. Things come apart. You're not all that focused. It's difficult to grow. That's why the fear side can only get but so strong, and the positive side can get a lot stronger than that. So it's kind of self-limiting sort of thing. So does that?
Yeah. No, that's good.
Does that answer it?
Yeah, thank you.
No, this way.
What created the overall primordial consciousness?
Bound to get that question. Yeah. Okay. It's a good question. And we can't see that. We can't answer that. And we can't know that. And the reason we can't is because we are consciousness. Okay, we're a piece of it. So we can't get outside of it to look back at it objectively and watch it being born, because we're a part of it. You see, nothing can watch you couldn't objectively watch yourself being born because you didn't exist yet, you hadn't been born yet. See, the camera can't take a picture of itself, it has to take a picture of something outside of itself. It's that sort of thing. So it's impossible for us as consciousness to have information about where this consciousness system came from, because we're just a part of this system. And we can't get outside of it to look back at it in a way that we could objectively say, oh, that's where that came from, because we're pieces of it. So that means that we have to just live gracefully with uncertainty. There is no answer to that. Now, it doesn't mean that there's an infinite series required. You know, so many origin stories that something just came out of nothing require infinite series. You know, well, what was its cause? Oh, this was its cause. Well, then what was its cause? Well, then what was its cause? And you know, we have an infinite series that goes back to I don't know. You know, because it gets beyond your ability to know. That doesn't mean this. All it means is we don't know. We can just admit that up front. Now, can a virtual reality or can a consciousness system create a virtual reality that creates a consciousness system? Can they be, can they be one be inside another? Can they be like a Venn diagram that way? Yes, they can. Consciousness system spawn another consciousness system. So was our consciousness system spawned by something else? Maybe. Will we ever be able to know? No. Can we make conjecture? Sure. But does it mean anything? No, because it's just conjecture. And in my books, I even get a little silly about it and talk about, well, perhaps our whole consciousness system is just one cell of another larger consciousness system, and I call that an Aomosaurus, you see. But I try to make it funny because it's not serious. It's conjecture. So yes, we can conjecture those things. We can even conjecture an infinite series, but that's illogical because nothing is infinite. There's no such thing as an infinite series that creates something. There is no, you can't have causality, without ending up in an infinite series, because there's always what caused that. So the whole idea of causality is that just start someplace. That's the way virtual realities are. They just start someplace. They don't have a beginning. They just are. So there's no answer to it, but it's not this we're just not smart enough, it's that there cannot be an answer to it. It's theoretically beyond our knowing to understand in any objective way other than conjecture. Now we can always make conjecture about it, but in any objective way, it's just beyond our knowledge. And sometimes that's hard for people to get, that there are some things that we just can't understand because logically the camera just doesn't take a picture of itself. Its picture is out there. It can't take a picture of itself. You see, it's just a logical impossibility, and that's where we are. So where did the original thing start? Don't know, but my big toe starts with an assumption that consciousness exists, because after I was looking for origins, I realized that that argument didn't go anywhere, that was more than anybody would know. So then I looked for the simplest way that the system could have existed. Reduce the system down to the bare simplest thing it would have, that then it could evolve into what it's become. And when you do that, the very simplest thing that it could have started with is an awareness, it's conscious, a system that had the awareness that it could exist in one of two states, and that it could choose what state it was existing. Oh, this is A and this is B. And that's all you need. If you have a system with awareness that could do that, that could create the whole conscious system just with evolution, which is the second assumption, is that evolution exists. And that is any system that can change will change itself in order to lower its entropy. Well, that's just one way of saying it. The idea of that it changes based on random excursions into all the possibilities, and the ones that work go on and the ones that don't work go away. So it's called natural selection. And that's the second. So just those two assumptions then allow us to say how it is this conscious system got to be the way it is. It started small, very, very dim awareness. Wasn't aware of anything more than A versus B, and that was it. But A versus B turned into a 1 and a 0. And if you can be aware of A and B, then with a little evolution, you can be aware of A, B, A, B, A, B, or A, B, A, and whatever, and now all you got strings of 1s and 0s. You can find meaning and structure in that order, and eventually you can evolve into this monstrous information system we call the larger consciousness system. And then you can produce individuated units of consciousness to aid in your evolution. You can discover technology called time, regular time. Now, non-regular time comes in with the assumption of consciousness exists, because if you could be in a state A or state B, we've already the assumption of time. I was in a state A and now I'm in a state B. There's a before state and an after state, and before and after is time. And time is just change. You can't have change without time. So time is a very fundamental thing. It comes right in with the assumption of consciousness. But now this isn't tick-tock regular time. This is just, there is a thing called change. There's time. Time is nothing more than the allowance of change, the ability. If you allow change, you've defined time. You've allowed time. See? So change and time are necessary for each other. You can't change without time, and you can't have time without anything changing, because time wouldn't mean anything. There would be no before or after anything happening, no change, then time doesn't have any meaning. Sort of like randomness. It's a word, but no content. So time comes in, just change, we call that primordial time, comes in like that. Now, regular time comes in as this larger conscious system develops, and patterns of ones and zeros, or A's and B's, or whatever, and it gets more evolved and more evolved. It comes up with a neat new idea of how it can decrease its entropy. And that is, I've ordered patterns, right? Up, down, up, down, up, down. I'm making patterns, ones, zeros, A, B's, whatever. And now I'm making patterns of patterns. Here's patterns of ones and zeros, and I'll duplicate those and make patterns of patterns of patterns, and that's nifty. But there's a limit to that. The brilliant idea was, I can make sequences of patterns, and sequences of patterns, and so on. That's another whole dimension of complication and order and structure that lowers entropy. A whole nother dimension of ways to slice and dice the information. So that gave it a lot more headroom for growth. So how could it do that? Well, if it could distinguish between states, A, B, then it just needed a way to go A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, and do that in a constant way. No, that's a metronome. That's a clock. It's just switching back and forth between two states regularly. So that's the first clock. And when it did that, now it could sequence things. And the sequences meant something. So that was I'd call that kind of time, regular time, a technology created by the larger consciousness system. Now, when it creates our virtual reality, our virtual reality is a simulation. Our simulation has a time loop in it. Right? It's a simulation. Every delta t, you recalculate. Next delta t, you recalculate. You keep adding those delta t's. That's the outer time loop of the simulation. That's our time. Our time progresses by a delta t loop in the simulation. In other words, everything's like here now, delta t later, it's here, delta t later, it's here. So everything moves as time progresses by one little chunk at a time. That's the same way your computer works. That's the same way your simulation and your games work. Time is an outer loop in the simulation for World of Warcraft, and it keeps ticking, and every time it ticks, the computer updates its screen as to where things are now. So that's our time. So every virtual reality has its own clock. So some other virtual reality has its own time loop with its own rule set, and it's clicking away on that time. So our time, if you say what's time, and if you mean time in this universe, well, that's a local time that has to do with our outer time loop for our simulation. And that's regular time. Because now we have defined time as a delta t, and that delta t is to this AB pendulum we have, or whatever we call it, metronome, that becomes the clock. But time itself, primordial time, time is just a concept, is logically necessary for change. And change is logically necessary for time. So where change came from is where time came from. Vice versa, I guess. They have to be together, just like free will and consciousness are logically necessary for each other. A consciousness without free will means without choice, doesn't have anything to do. So it's not conscious, like time without change. It's not defined. It's an undefined thing. It doesn't do anything, so it doesn't really exist. It's just an idea with nothing to it. So there are these logical logical pairs, or things that are necessary for each other. They're not always pairs, they're groups of things. So time and free will and consciousness are all logically necessary. You can't have consciousness without change. If you have change, you have choice. If you have choice, you have free will. Without choice, you don't have change. With change, you don't have time. You see, these things all come together. So if you got any of it, you've got all of those. They're all necessary. So that's kind of the origin of time. Now, the origin of time here, like I say, that's a computer science problem. Primordial time came with consciousness, and consciousness came with just with an assumption in MBT. It just exists. So time just exists and free will just exists because they're all necessary for each other. And I start that as an assumption because I can't go back any further than that.
Would there be a delta Q around primordial?
Well, we don't know that. She said, would there then be a time loop around the primordial consciousness? Is there a time loop that defines that change? Well, there might be. We don't know. We just don't know what is outside of the larger conscious system, primordial consciousness, because we just can't tell that. Now we can guess, and maybe some of our guesses are more informed than others. All we can say is it was an awareness that was able to distinguish A from B, two states that it could be in. And that's just an assumption. Because you could say, well, okay, it must have had an outer time loop, and then, well, where did that outer time loop come from, and what consciousness, and you end up back in an infinite series. Instead of doing that, which isn't helpful at all, you might as well just admit the fact, which is, we don't know. We're ignorant, and we're not going to find out. It's not that we can find out. We can only find out if we can get out of the system of consciousness that we're in. Then maybe we can look back and say, well, look, I see there's a conscious system, there's a conscious system, and they got these little threads going between them, and we can say all that, but we are a part of the system. We can't get out and look at it and be in it. We're stuck. So at this point, it's like ignorance is a logical requirement on this subject. There isn't a way. It's not that we're not clever enough, it's just, you just can't know. Yeah. So see, I already answered your question, didn't I?
Yeah, that answered my question.
Yeah. He was going to ask that next. He had a microphone in his hand and was going to ask that, so I just went ahead and did it.
So, but there is still one point. So still it's possible that you go to a dream 3 hours here and live another virtual reality for 6 years because it happened to me.
Yes, the time is different. Yes, the other virtual realities run on their own time. So you know, there's time and there's the perception of time. And those are also two different things. So you can have a dream that physically here, if somebody's doing your REM eye motion, right? And that's what happens when you're dreaming. So they can say, okay, he's been dreaming for 15 minutes, let's wake him up and see what he's dreaming about. Well, they know that took 15 minutes of our time, but that may have been a month in some other reality frame. You see, it doesn't necessarily mean it's 15 minutes everywhere. It's only 15 minutes inside this. Once you leave this reality frame and you're not part of this physical thing, this clock ticking doesn't control, you know, isn't relative to you. Now you can engage in any system on any time, however fast or slow that is or whatever. You know, it's up to you, and your perception of time is not always the same as time. The perception of time has to do with how much you got accomplished, how much happened. You know, so you go to reality frame and you end up going through years worth of things. Well, you were there, you met somebody nice, you know, you got married, you had kids, you had a family, they grew up. You go through this whole thing, you know, you're going through a whole lifetime, and you say, wow, I must have been there a long time, but maybe not. You just did a lot of stuff.
But there's another consequence to that. I went to university, then I got graduated in an industrial engineering field. and I'm currently here and a computer engineer, and I carry that knowledge. So I'm not sure if it's fair to use that knowledge because I didn't put any effort into this from this universe. So this is another thing that I hit. I'm not sure if I can use that knowledge, the knowledge of industrial engineering.
Mm-hmm.
So because that virtual reality that I experienced was really similar to this one.
Mm-hmm.
I can say, even I checked the courses that I passed, almost 90% of it was similar to an industrial engineering field here.
Mm-hmm. Sure, that you can use the knowledge if it's applicable. Anything that you know that's applicable to that other virtual reality, it's still yours. You're still based here. You're getting here from this avatar. So you're still the free will awareness unit. You're still immersed in this avatar that's your body. From there, you are getting in other data streams, other places, but you're still connected back to this free will awareness unit and that avatar. So if you're in one of those other virtual realities and somebody comes into your room and throws a bucket of cold water on you, you will return immediately. You see, because you're still tethered back here in the sequence of who you are and where you come. So it's not like I'm out there, somebody throws a bucket of water on me, I won't notice. You'll notice because you're connected through that chain and you'll come back here. But just, you can take any of your knowledge, all of your experience with you, goes with you wherever you go. And if you get someplace where you can apply it, you can apply it, not a problem. A lot of places you go, the knowledge you have isn't applicable. It doesn't, this just doesn't fit there. But you can still apply it. You can't help but apply it because even though you're in some other reality frame, the way you interpret the data there is based on your understanding that you gain here. So you're still interpreting the data in terms of this reality frame when you're in some other reality frame. Of course, that's a problem. How similar is that? Well, we don't know because we get data, we interpret it with the best pattern match. That's why the other day I said some of it was your own interpretation. You're getting data and you're making a pattern match. If in your knowledge base, which is everything, your experience base, you have industrial engineering terminology, ideas, and concepts, you may interpret the data you get in terms of those concepts. If you don't, you'll interpret the data in terms of some other concepts. So you get an engineer's view of that world. Somebody else will get an accountant's view of that world. Somebody else will get a priest's view of that world, and they're all different views, and you all describe them differently because you have different experience and knowledge sets. So you have to be a little careful about what you see is what's there. What you see is your best pattern match to what was there. But where we don't have much of a good pattern match, where our pattern match is sorely lacking, we'll fill it up with something. Sometimes people don't. Sometimes people just come back with a blank. I was there and I felt like I did a lot of stuff, but I don't have any idea what any of it was. And some of that's not just bad memory. Some of that is they just don't have anything in their database that's even close. So they just can't explain it. They just know they've been somewhere, done something, and couldn't tell because there's nothing for them to pattern match it to. But so that means the more you've explored, the more you're educated, the more you've seen, the more you've experienced, the better you are at bringing back information that makes sense because you have a bigger database to check it against. So that's one of these things that when you start doing this, you're not so good at it because your experience is very small. You've been doing this for 40 years, then your experience base is much larger and you understand things better just because you have a larger database in which to do your pattern matching. So it's partly you get better at it the more you experience it like anything else. You're doing a lot of guessing, and that gets less and less as you go on, but there's still things that you've never experienced aren't in your database, and you're going to have to struggle with those. So you never quite ever believe what it is that you get. It's always kind of, yeah, I think I understood that, and it looked like this, but I give that a 75% that it was sort of, that at least I'm part right. And that's about the best you can do. But if you go back there 20 times, you see it makes a difference. If it's a one shot, you don't know much. But if you've been back there 20 times or 30 times or 100 times, you start to fill all the things in, you start to understand, and you start to be able to interpret from past experiences there, present experiences there, and then what you're doing is you're becoming acclimated there. You're building up an experience base there. But if it's a one-shot thing, it's got a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, like some you go to and you actually realize you have a history there. You can remember the there, and that's what I like.
Yes.
It's pretty neat, right? Sometimes you go there and you go, I've been here before and I actually remember my history, right?
Yeah.
John's been waiting to ask a question.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Sorry, if you were done.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I was just going to ask, we were talking about potential platforms for consciousness. I was just wondering how you feel about the potential for artificial intelligence. I see lately we're developing quantum computer capability and so forth. I was wondering if you think that's possible in our near future and what maybe the implications are for that.
Sure. Interesting topic. First of all, you don't program consciousness. It's not that you create consciousness, you create a platform, as you say, that serves as an avatar for consciousness. It's a virtual computer. It's a virtual body, just like this is a virtual body. It's just a different virtual body that does different things. So you think of a computer as really not a whole lot different than a human or a dog or a bumblebee. It's just a different virtual thing. Now, if you can give that computer choice, that computer actually makes choice, okay? It has its own ability to choose things. It can decide, I'm gonna go this way or that way. It's not all algorithmic. If it's just algorithms, the algorithms have the logic and says whenever you get here, you go there, and when you get there, you do this, and there's no choice in that. But you can have things like, you can have algorithms that are not, the fuzzy logic, things with, what do we call them, where they do simulations of the way the brain works. No, what's the, neural nets. You can have neural nets, you see, those are non-algorithmic. You don't know what you're going to get out of it. You train it, and it kind of does whatever it does, and however it does it, nobody has a clue. It's just somehow in its training and the way it's done it, it puts it out. So there's uncertainty involved in it. So where there's uncertainty, if you have enough of that, so let's say you create a computer and you give it the software and hardware that it needs to where it is deciding things, it's making choices. They're not algorithms, but it's truly making choices. Well, if those choices are interesting to an individuated unit of consciousness because they could help it evolve, then an individuated unit of consciousness is going to log in and attach to that and become the consciousness for it, you see? So it's not that you compute consciousness, you provide a platform of choice that consciousness finds interesting and helpful, useful for its evolution, and then a consciousness can, and this is a simulation, a consciousness could log in and play that character, if you will. Now the way it happened in our simulation is that when the evolution of the big digital bang in our universe evolved, in the beginning the larger conscious system played all the parts. There was a lot of randomness going on. There are certain choices and it would just kind of randomly choose which choices made, and going on until it got to a point that there were avatars, simulated beings, that were making choices that were valuable to consciousness. Oh, if a consciousness were making those choices, an individuated consciousness and another individuated consciousness making the choices for the other, they could interact and so on. It got to that point that it was useful. It's not too useful to make, avatars aren't that interested in maybe being bumblebees. Maybe a few were, maybe it's more fun to be a whole swarm of bumblebees than just one bumblebee, but in any case, the choices aren't that gripping. It's not a lot of moral choice there that a consciousness is really going to learn in leaps and bounds if you're at that level. But once you get a being evolved in the simulation, a being, you know, a virtual avatar, a virtual being, an elf, evolved enough that the choices that it makes are interesting, then consciousness starts to partake of that. So that's what you do. You're not really programming consciousness, as you're making an environment in which consciousness finds attractive to use as an evolutionary platform. So if you do that, the consciousness will take advantage of it. So that's really what you need to do, is to create this system in which consciousness can make the choices. And then consciousness will make the choice. So it will become, and if it just makes a very few choices, you'll start off with a consciousness perhaps that just needs to make a little few choices. Maybe you've got a bumblebee's choice in that. Maybe that's your first conscious computer, works like a bumblebee. And it does certain things, but it doesn't have a whole lot of choices it makes. Well, that's fine, but then as the software gets better and the hardware gets faster and so on, the choices may get better and better. And it just has to not be algorithmic, because then there's no choice. Oops, sorry. It has to be non-algorithmic. It has to be real choice that's meaningful in the system. So as long as it's algorithmic, you'll never make consciousness, because that's not what's going on. It has to be, you know, like this, we've mentioned a couple times, this no man's sky. So it has to be like that, where nobody, the programmers included, nobody has any idea what you're going to find on any of these planets. They have no idea where they are, because they weren't programmed. They just get generated on the fly. And how the generation process and what it's going to create is totally unknown. So see, that's the way it'll have to be in this computer that gets consciousness. It's the way these choices are made and how it comes out and why it makes choice A rather than B. Nobody has a clue. Well, that's what the neural nets do that. The neural nets are going down that path. So if we have that kind of processor going on, then that's something that consciousness can inhabit and make choices in.
I find that interesting too in reverse when you think about when you talk about our own part in consciousness and developing this, in the sense that we're doing that too, in the same way. So if you look at it the other backwards, the same way.
Yeah, it works exactly the same way. And the consciousness that would inhabit a computer would be in the same thing we're doing. It would just be in a different thing, like in a little dog over here. You know, there's a conscious inhabiting that, and it's doing the same thing we're doing. It's learning, growing, trying to let go of the fear and become love.
Explains that objective, in a way, physical iteration as well.
Yes. That's right. So once that computer is conscious or is being played, right? Once that computer is an avatar being played by a consciousness, that's what we mean when we say once that computer is conscious. The computer isn't conscious anymore, and these bodies are conscious. The computer is just an avatar that consciousness is playing. Once it gets to that point, then consciousness is consciousness. That consciousness can modify future probability with its intent. If you pull that plug on that computer and throw it in a trash, that consciousness survives. So it's just consciousness. You get another computer and plug it in, that consciousness can incarnate in that computer. You see? So it's not like you'll pull out the plug of your conscious computer and kill it. It's just an avatar. It's consciousness. It's immortal. So will that computer have a soul? Yes, just like we do. Same reason, for the same purpose. Will it be different? Yes, because the consciousness that inhabits and does choices that a computer makes is going to be very different than the consciousness that inhabits a human avatar and makes those choices. A different kind of set of choices, a different kind of consciousness, a different kind of awareness. So it will be consciousness, but it will be different. Shouldn't be quite as emotional as we are. But who knows? It could turn into that. Yeah.
Can we just take one more question? He's been waiting, and then maybe lunch.
Okay. Yes.
Nice.
All right. First of all, thank you very much. this is a really exciting morning for me. I'm getting so many answers. So when I'm looking at applying this daily, and about 8 years ago, give or take, I just chose to believe that this life is magical. And there's just too many things that I was drawn to. Watch a Disney movie, and I think, yes, and they watch Star Wars, and yes, there is the Force. You know, all this stuff, and I just chose to go, there's too much. I'm too drawn to this. Life is magical, and I have access to it, somehow. And then probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was driving to work, and I went, so what am I here for? Like, really? And I didn't have the vocabulary for it at the time, but basically, in the moment, I knew in my heart, I went, I'm here to be as close to God as possible. Like, that's the purpose for my existence. As I've applied that, without even knowing it, those choices, I ended up down this path. And with what you said this morning about beliefs and intent, that, 2 weeks ago, I ended up utilizing a light being, that brought me to another state where I was having a conversation with my higher self. And we were in this place, and it was amazing. We were having this hilarious conversation, right? And realizing that this is a hologram. And it's just a hologram. And I was laughing, like, so you're gonna fix me? And like, there's nothing to fix. And we're having this amazing conversation, really joyous. And then another light being stepped in and said, and it said, well, would you like to be a disciple of mine? And this kind of gets to her question earlier. And in the moment, I actually crapped my pants, because I thought, wow, like, what would I have to give up in order to be a disciple about being of light? And I went, oh, well, I must have all kinds of attachments that I can let go of. It really don't matter, right? These physical attachments. And so, like your question, your answer about it really doesn't matter where it comes from. It's what you learn from it.
Right.
And so now when I'm looking at everything that's happening this morning, the answers that I'm getting, it's like the flavor I'm getting for the rest of my life is the greater my belief, or the greater my knowing inside of that, with intent coming from my being, really, I can create anything. Sort of. But I don't know. You know where I'm trying to go, like what my question is?
Yeah, I see where you're headed. You have this sense of no limitation. You have a sense of seeing yourself now in a bigger picture and as a piece of something larger, with what seems to you at the moment as limitless possibility, because it's so complex and so whatever. And that's probably a good attitude to have, because that attitude will always keep you humble, because you know you're just a small piece of something very much bigger. But you have to go through, you can't skip steps. You can't leap beyond where you are. You have to be right where you are now. That's you, the authentic person. And you will become more authentic and have more choices as you let go of any fear, any ego, and any beliefs. As you let go of any of those beliefs, then suddenly you have more choices, because a belief is a constraining thing. So if you believe that it's, things are this way, then you always see them that way, and any information that comes in that's contradictory to that, you either excuse it as an error or you just set it aside. So it's very limiting. So there's as much as you now have kind of gotten rid of some beliefs and ego that you've been working on, you see this whole big thing out here, and it's kind of wow, and at the same time you feel kind of small, but kind of amazing that this is all yours. You can explore this. You can become this. You can grow up to that. And that's a pretty accurate assessment of where you are. And that's good. But don't think it'll necessarily be easy, or that just because you understand that it's there that you're almost done. You know, that it's, oh, it's just, I just have to step into it. Well, no, you have to grow into it. And the way you become that, and the way you fill out that limitless thing that you can become, is by progressively getting rid of that ego and the fear and the beliefs. Because every time you get rid of that, your decision space grows immensely. The reality that you live in gets bigger. So if you have a belief and you tear that belief up and throw it away, now your reality is bigger than it was. Your understanding is better. You get rid of a fear, now your reality's grown and it's bigger. And as your reality gets bigger, your decision space, the things that you can do, like taste somebody else's pickle, you know, the things that are available to you, these are options now. These are choices you have that you didn't have before. So the choices get bigger, and your responsibility for those choices and for choosing wisely, you see, gets bigger too. So you being a responsible, caring person has to grow with, you know, the size of your reality. So the whole thing just grows up, and you learn, you grow, and it's not necessarily easy, because even when you think you've got a lot of your fear done with, you will meet somebody, particularly in close relationships, that has the knack of reaching in and grabbing some part of your ego and shaking it, and you have this reaction, and then you'll look at it later and you say, oh, man, that really hit my button, you know, and I went nuts there, and I shouldn't have done that. And you convince yourself that that really is not a good thing, and you don't want to do that, and then reach in, hit that button again, and you have the same reaction. You see, because that fear is in there. Now you know it's going to be some hard work. You're going to have to dig that, you're going to have to face it, accept it, and then have the courage to walk past it, go beyond it. And all of that takes time and work. But the good news is, the bad news is it's not quick, it's not easy, and it takes effort. The good news is that if you can constantly want to do it, if you have the desire, the drive to do that, to grow up, to be all that you can be, then it will happen. There's nothing in your way other than you. There's no barrier that will prevent you from doing all of it, except the barriers that you bring with you. So that's the good news. So there is no barrier. Yes, all of that you can be. It is unlimited. At least unlimited from your perspective now. Looks to be unlimited. That'll all change as you go, but all that's true. That's the way it is, but it's not easy, and it takes a lot of time, and you have to see it not as something you're going to accomplish in the next year. Like, now I've got it, all right, 6 months I'll be there. It's like, this is a lifetime's work. This is probably many lifetimes' work. And you just have to have that perspective that, all right, I'm going to start chipping away at it, you know, as best I can, and not get overwhelmed with it. Wow, because as you get into it, what you find more and more as you see your fears, suddenly your idea of how advanced you are starts to crumble, because you say, well, I didn't think I had but maybe 1 or 2 little fears, and then suddenly you find out there's all of these fears, and people get overwhelmed. Oh, I can't, I'm not going to get through all of that. It's just impossible. Maybe next time. But that's the bad attitude. What you have to do is, wherever it is you are on this thing, just start chipping away at it as best you can. And you'll get further. And the further you go, the bigger your reality will get, and the easier it'll be for you to go further yet. It just gets easier and easier. You know, the more you go along this path, the more you evolve, the easier it is to evolve more. So it does speed up with time, but you usually start from a position of almost being overwhelmed. When you kind of first see the big picture, it can be overwhelming. First, it's very exciting. Oh, wow, look at this, you know, like Christmas. And then once you actually get into doing it, it's, oh man, I've really got a long way to go. You know, it's that. But don't let that bother you or discourage you. It just means you just chip away at it. You are wherever you are. You know, I've been chipping away at it, you know, since probably shortly after I was born. You know, I've been chipping away at it for a long, long time, and it just slowly, you know, I'm probably a slow learner, but slowly you just get there, and that's okay.
This won't take long to act, but when you were talking this morning about community and approaching community from a place of love, and people in a fear base, they feel like they're threatened by that. And what I was getting at this as well was that not from an ego point of view, but we are all an essential part of consciousness. So we're actually, you know, the self-worth and the self-importance without ego.
Sure.
It's actually greater inside the community of love.
Yes. Wow. Absolutely. Yes. Every individuated unit of consciousness, even the bumblebees and the dogs and the cats, all are a very important and essential part of the whole system. It's all there. It's all evolving. It's all doing the best it can with what it has. And we are here in our spot doing this, and they're in their spots doing that. And it's all part of the same process. We are the larger consciousness system's strategy for evolution. And we particularly can feel like the chosen ones, perhaps, that we get to come in this virtual reality. This is a fast track. This is a place where, you know, the people who can learn can learn. So we get to come to a place like this and say, yeah, with all the, you know, deceit and greed and all this stuff, this is an advantage. It is. It's an advantage because there are challenges here to our growing. And once we grasp that and start meeting those challenges, then this place doesn't seem so awful anymore because we don't interpret it that way, because we see the necessity for it and we see our part in it. So yes, that's true. We're all very significant. We are a piece. We're chips off that block. You know, we're a piece of that larger consciousness system. And we have the same potential in our piece that the whole system has. Because we're just a part of it. We can evolve just as it's evolved. So we're of the same stuff. It's not like we're a limited, crippled piece that can only go so far. We're a piece of consciousness. Consciousness is still in the process of evolving. There is no limit. If you and your individual unit of consciousness get to the same point where the larger conscious system is now, well, the larger conscious system is still evolving too. You don't get to an end. It's open-ended. So, yeah, that's a neat thought, isn't it? Yeah, it's a really neat thought, is that you are a very important part of something very big and very meaningful. That's true. And then that helps make you feel responsible for doing your part right, because your interaction affects a lot of other people. And if you become love, you will affect hundreds of other people to move in that direction. Not because you explain anything to them, just by you being you, just by example, just by interacting with you. So that's what we do. As we grow up, we become sources for other people to grow up. It's the shared link we have. It's the archetypes we generate, okay, in Jung's talk. So that's the biggest thing we can do to create world peace, eradicate hunger, get rid of greed. You say, how can we do all these things? The most important thing you can do is become love. Raise yourself up, and that will help bring up the whole boat floats as you gain. So that's the most important thing you can do. Other than that, all you're doing is working at symptoms. You can say, okay, this corporation or this dictator or this political party or whatever, they're causing trouble. If we could just get rid of them, everything would be better here. If you get rid of them, something just like them, well, within a generation or less, replace it. Why? Because they are a reflection of us. It's not that that's the evil that's making us you know, bad. Oh, we'd all be saints if it wasn't for those nasty corporations and bad politicians. It's not the case. They represent us, not just literally, but they do represent us. They represent our quality of consciousness, our humanity's quality of consciousness. So if you remove one, you just get put back, because that's us. If you change us, then that leadership will just automatically change, because again, it will reflect us. It'll get kinder and gentler because we're kinder and gentler. So you don't make things better by switching things around, you know, by rearranging the chairs on the Titanic, right? That's not doing it. So changing the outside world to make it better is symptomatic relief. Okay, you get rid of a mean dictator, now everybody that was under the boot of that dictator gets a little relief. But it's a symptomatic thing. You've now treated a symptom. You haven't treated the disease, which means the disease will reassert itself. So that's, you know, that's what you can do if you want to change the world, is change yourself. That's the biggest thing that you can do. Changing outside things are just symptomatic. It may make things a little nicer for a little while for some people, but it won't change anything in the long run. In the long run, you'll get the same thing back if we don't change.
Awesome morning, thank you. Awesome.
Thank you.
Let's go